everybody. Happy Monday. This is Charlene O'Hanlon. Welcome to another episode of TechStrong TV. I am super excited about today's broadcast. We have so many great interviews. As always, we kick things off today with an interview between Alan and Jeff Williams, who is the co-founder and CTO of Contrast Security. They talk about the findings of Contrast Security's latest research on open source application security and more. There are a lot of great, interesting findings in the survey, and it's a great conversation that Alan and Jeff have. After that, Alan speaks with Curtis Simpson, who is the CISO of Armis. Armis is all about IoT security, and they've been doing what they can to simplify it. So Alan and Curtis Simpson talk about what Armis is doing to help secure IoT devices and the organizations that run them. It's a great conversation. After that, we have a conversation between Alan and Derek Langone, who is the president of Digital AI and certainly no stranger to TechStrong TV. He goes over the latest findings of his latest survey on digital transformation that Digital AI recently did, and again, some fascinating results that have come out of that. I'll tell you that the pandemic last year changed everything for everybody, and a lot of these surveys are now reflecting that. So, great conversation between Derek and Alan. After that, we have the latest episode of the Haunted Hacker podcast. Unfortunately, we had some connection issues, so the podcast starts a little in the middle of it, but it is a conversation between Chris Sistrunk, who is the technical manager at Mondiant, and a host, Mike Jones, and they talk about all things Scada and security, including Stuxnet and SolarWinds. So it's a great conversation, certainly very relevant to what's happening out there today. So we'll try and get the whole thing and get it on up for you. But if not, just please know that the Haunted Hacker is a little cut off this time around. After that, we have our Something Old segment, which is from the recent Predict 2021 Virtual Summit. We have Chris Weber, who is the VP of Marketing at Styra, and he talks about cloud native transforms the IT core. I think we all pretty much understand that, but he goes into detail about how traditional IT organizations this year are going to be embracing cloud native computing so much more, which is going to impact everything related to IT, from security and platform architects to general infrastructure and operations, and obviously also personnel and what organizations are going to be looking for when they hire their new employees, and just the way that organizations are approaching their infrastructures in general. It is a fascinating presentation, definitely one worth checking out. After that, I come back and I have the headlines for you, and then I have a conversation with Mark Vandeweil, who is the CTO of HVR, and a great conversation that we have about data hygiene for optimized business decision making, and how important it is to have the right data to make the right decisions. It's a great conversation. After that, I speak with Chris Wade, who is the CTO of Itential. We talk about the importance of network automation, why networks are often overlooked and taken for granted, and why it would be a critical setback for organizations if they don't recognize the network's impact on enterprise growth. I kind of like to joke and say that the network is sexy again. Everybody's thinking about the network, and that is never more true in the conversation with Chris that he and I have about the network. So great stuff. After that, I talk about, come back and have the webinars preview for you, as I always do. And then we dive right into Mitch Ashley's Analyst Corner. He's talking about all things analyst related, basically IT, but he also talks about zero trust. And he speaks with Todd Waskelis, who is the AVP of AT&T Cybersecurity. They talk about zero trust as an example of when outside expertise is brought in to help with cybersecurity strategy and execution. They also talk about the top needs that organizations and government entities have in today's digital transformation age, and the reliability and agility that organizations are now expecting from their cybersecurity teams. So certainly zero trust and digital transformation have really pivoted organizations embracing of newer security technologies and their expectations around that. So it's a great conversation, definitely one worth checking out. All right, we have a jam-packed TechStrong TV for you, as always, and with lots of great information, and we are going to get things kicked off right after these commercial messages.
SecurityBoulevard.com is the leading resource for news, analysis, and education on challenges facing the cybersecurity industry. SecurityBoulevard.com covers all aspects of cybersecurity, including data security,
DevSecOps,
cloud security, application security, network security, security threats, and more. SecurityBoulevard.com has the largest selection of security content, featuring breaking news, blog posts, podcasts, and more. Visit www.securityboulevard.com to learn more. SecurityBoulevard.com, home of Security Bloggers Network.
All right, welcome back. We're going to kick things off now with a conversation between Alan and Jeff Williams, who is the co-founder and CTO of Contrast Security. They're going to talk about the findings of Contrast Security's latest research on open source AppSec and more. Great conversation. Let's give it a listen.
This is Digital Anarchist.
Hey everyone, thanks for joining us here on another episode of TechStrong TV. My guest for this segment is my friend Jeff Williams. Jeff, if you don't know, is the co-founder, CTO of Contrast Security, a well-regarded firm out of Maryland. Hey Jeff, welcome to TechStrong TV.
Hey Alan, thanks for having me.
Pleasure to have you on. Jeff, I'm trying to think I know the last time I saw you was RSA right before COVID hit last year.
That's the last
trip
I took.
The end of February. Me too.
Yep.
But I'm just trying to think if we spoke. I don't know if we've done a TechStrong or maybe early on. We're doing TechStrong TV a year now, so it's possible. We've had John in the year.
The Contrast AppSec platform at some point.
Yeah. I think it's in any event, it's been months. I know that for sure. I haven't seen you or spoken to you in a while. Before we jump into the survey that you guys recently did, how are things otherwise with you in Contrast?
Really fantastic. We've grown the company. We've got 350 people now.
Wow.
Our approach to AppSec is a little different. We're moving away from the static, dynamic WAF model to an inside-out kind of model, using IaaS and RASP and cool new technologies that are much more amenable to DevOps. So it's really we've got some fantastic customers that are really expanding the use of these new technologies.
Excellent, good stuff. And of course, before we get started, anyone who's interested, contrastsecurity.com.
That's right.
They can go to get information. Good.
Yep.
Because, Jeff, I wanted to spend most of our time talking about this new survey you guys recently released around open source usage. And it's a little different, right, than some of the other open source measurement analysis surveys we've seen. Talk to us.
Yeah, so we just released our 2021 open source security report. And what we did is we monitor tens of thousands of applications for security, and we took all that data about the open source they're using and how they're using it and the security attributes of that, of those libraries. And we crunched the data. We put together a great report that's got a bunch of really interesting facts and statistics about real world open source use. And I'll just start off with the big eye opener. I think something that a lot of people will be surprised at is the percentage of applications that are open source. Sort of the conventional wisdom is, 80 or 90% of your applications are open source. Well, we actually studied it, and we directly measure the amount of open source that's actually used inside the running application. I mean, there's a ton of libraries that never get used at all. We'll talk about that. But the real active code, only just under 10% is actually open source. And so,
Really?
it's just really important to understand where your risk is coming from. Custom code is 90% of your app, and that the active open source is about 10%.
Huh. That flies in the face of what we've been told over the last couple of years, right?
Yeah, that's right. Well, if you measure it sort of the traditional way, like you just look at the list of libraries that's included and calculate the dependencies and add up all that, it looks like 80%, but almost none of that code really runs. 68% of libraries are never invoked at all.
Really?
A stunning number. But it's all these transitive dependencies that get pulled in to support functions that you're not even using in your libraries.
So is it bloat? Is that what we're talking about? Bloat in the app here? Or?
Well, sort of. I mean, it's more like, extra parts that you're not using right now. So
I call that bloat, but it's okay,
Well, it's just I don't want people to get confused. This unused open source code doesn't really matter. It doesn't present any risk to you, and it comes along as part of your application, but it's it's not that big. It's a few megabytes of code that never runs, and it's not like disk space is at a premium these days. So it's really not making any difference. I don't want people to go out and think, oh, well, what I need to do is try to eliminate all that unused code. What you need to do is focus on securing the code that actually runs. That's the key.
Yeah. I mean, but I can't help but be reminded what we say about government spending, right? $1 billion here, $1 billion there. Before you know it, you're talking real money. A few megabytes here, a few megabytes there, the amount of apps that you're running in the average enterprise, it's not even just the storage. I'm thinking the fact that they're there and not invoked, are they, what in law school we would call it contingent liability. Are they contingent liabilities? Are they sort of back doors waiting to be exploited?
And it is a common reaction to think that way, but it's really not. You really need to focus on the libraries that you're using that are vulnerable, the ones that actually get invoked.
Okay.
Those are the ones that matter. Those will kill you. Those other ones, you're not at risk from those libraries. So there's other tools that report vulnerabilities in those libraries. Great, fix them or update them sometime in the future, but they're not the priority here. In AppSec, we got to focus on the things that really matter. It's the basic blocking and tackling. And so I want you to really focus on those vulnerabilities in libraries that are actually used.
Well, I'm playing the perfect show for you here, Jeff. But so give us an idea then. I mean, so that's eye-opening. What other kind of insights from the survey?
We found in libraries that you are using, only 31% of those classes get used. So even if you're using a library, you're not using all of that library. That's how we get to the 10% total number of active classes in an application. And not just that, so I guess one of the other things that we studied in the report is kind of the big picture of open source use. Obviously, it's exploding. The average application has 128 libraries. And it's interesting, in Java, it's right about that average. .NET is far less. And Node is much more. It's over 300 libraries per application in Node. Just differences in the way functions get packaged up in those different languages. So it's interesting. We also looked at. Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
No. I'm just agreeing.
Yeah, we also looked at this idea of the supply chain, and we dug into that a little bit deeper. So traditionally, AppSec focuses on vulnerabilities in custom code that get exploited in production. And the picture is expanding these days. Over the last few years, we've seen an increased focus on these open source libraries that are coming in. That's what I think of the supply chain. It's like the open source libraries that are coming into the factory, and you're using those parts to build them into your application, and eventually, out comes the fully formed application, and it may have vulnerabilities due to custom code or due to libraries. But there's some recent attacks that are interesting. They're on the software factory itself and some of the mechanisms that process these open source libraries. So if you look at SolarWinds, for instance, they targeted the build server to get into SolarWinds. And so that's like a new dimension of risk for application security to deal with. Like, how do you secure the actual factory that the custom code's coming in, the software's getting written, and the product's going out, but the factory itself. And it's not just the build server that's at risk here. Any of the machinery that you use to develop software could be attacked and could be used to either Trojan or put vulnerabilities into your application. So, IDEs and, developer tools, certainly build tools, dependency managers, bug trackers, all sorts of things could be used, testing frameworks, all those things could be used to undermine the integrity of your application. And so it's kind of a whole new field for AppSec to really have to focus on now that attackers have turned up the heat.
Well, it's a whole new attack surface, right? We have all of a sudden now the factory itself is under attack, not just the code in it. And so it's a lot more surface that we need to test. But again, let me take a simpleton approach to it and tell me why I'm wrong or right, which is, you know what? We got into the whole shift left testing thing. We were testing code all the way through this factory, right?
Sure.
Have we stopped scanning code right before it's deployed? Because if something's injected during the build process, shouldn't we pick it up at a point of deployment scan, or are we not at the point of deployment scans?
Well, here's the thing. And this is not targeting SAST or DAST or IAST or any approach to that scanning. All of those tools target unintentional vulnerabilities. When we're talking about compromising the build pipeline, we're talking about motivated attackers inserting intentional backdoors and vulnerabilities into applications. And they're just much, much more difficult to detect. We don't have tools that are very good at that. I wrote a Black Hat paper a number of years ago focusing on these different techniques. And, we can scratch the surface and find some of the really easy stuff, but sophisticated attacks are not possible to automatically detect.
Absolutely not. And so let me bring a full circle back to my original point, is by having all these unused libraries and so forth, code in there, is it giving these people a more cover to hide for these intentional sort of attacks?
I don't really think so. I mean, I know you really want to push this point, but
I'm not. I'm just bringing it up. If the code
doesn't run, it doesn't ever. None of those vectors make a difference. They never execute. I'm a fan of keeping software up to date. Generally, like I think that's the most cost-effective way to manage your supply chain is to, have a process in your factory that keeps that open source close to the latest version. I'm not going to say at the latest version, but you should stay pretty close. But I don't think that updating libraries that are never used is really critical to security.
Okay, that's fair enough. Jeff, we got a couple. We got time for another point or two. What else in the survey can you bring out for us?
We looked at a new attack called Dependency Confusion. I don't know if you're familiar with this. It got some press a few months ago, but it's an interesting attack. Basically, attackers are tricking build servers into fetching the wrong library and bringing it in.
Actually, we did see this, yes.
Yeah, it's really interesting. It's like, if you're a big company and you've got some internal libraries that you're using and you name them something, if the attacker can figure that out and they make a public repo with a library that has the same name but like a greater version number or the exact same name, sometimes these build tools will inadvertently pull in the attacker's version instead of your internal local version of the library. And once they get that library in, then because that library is active, it'll run and they can actually run code as part of this. One of our researchers tested Microsoft Teams and did exactly this. They were able to run code inside Microsoft's build pipeline. And just imagine if an attacker had figured that out. They would and managed to insert some malicious code into Teams. That's hundreds and hundreds of millions of accounts that they would have compromised.
Almost as bad as if it happened in Exchange.
Yeah, that's exactly right.
But we've seen this also, Jeff, with Docker containers, with containers in the Docker registry, right?
That's right.
Closely named or like a different version, so it makes it seem like it's the up-to-date version. And now
we call it typo squatting sometimes.
Yeah, I mean now. It turned out they were doing it basically to turn these apps into Bitcoin mining,
Right.
which is kind of I think a stupid, well, with the price of Bitcoin, and nothing stupid. But it seems like a waste of a good attack kind of thing, or a good vector. But yeah.
It's just the easiest thing, right? If they were really smart, they would know that when they break into these organizations, they could do way more damage, steal lots more money, lots more sensitive information. But it's like the easiest thing they can do to turn these vulnerabilities into money.
Yeah, into mining. But anyway, interesting. Jeff, so this is an annual survey you guys do. It just came out for 2021. I'm assuming people can get it up on the website?
Yeah, if you go to contrastsecurity.com, you can download the report from there. There's also some webinars that we did on the topic to dive deeper into some of these statistics if you want to consume it that way.
Very cool. Very cool. Jeff, don't stay away so long next time. Come back. Keep us posted here, man.
Love to.
Good
Always
talking
great.
to you.
Thanks.
It is. Jeff Williams, co-founder, CTO, Contrast Security. Their 2021 open source survey and report is out right now, an analysis. And you know what? Contrary to popular belief, only 10% of your applications are actually running, or the code running is open source.
Now you got it. Excellent.
All right. Good. Hey, Jeff, man, be well. Come back. We'll see you soon.
Thanks, Alan.
All right. This is Alan Schimmel for TechStrong TV. We're going to take a break, and we'll be right back with our next guest.
CISO Talk, to hear how real-world CISOs are dealing with today's real-world issues. From enabling secure remote workers to accelerating secure cloud adoption, defending against a pandemic of security attacks and beyond, CISO Talk covers the cyber topics you want to learn about. With your hosts, Unisys CISO Matt Newfield and MediaOps CEO Alan Schimmel, featuring a revolving panel of CISO cyber experts. This is where CISOs talk. Join us on digitalanarchist.com and techstrong.tv.
All right, next up we've got Alan speaking with Curtis Simpson, who is the CISO of Armis. They talk about IoT security and what Armis is doing to help organizations secure their IoT devices. It's a great conversation. Let's give it a listen.
This is Digital Anarchist.
Hey everyone, thanks for joining us on another segment here for TechStrong TV. My guest this segment is Curtis Simpson. Curtis is the CISO at Armis. Curtis, welcome to TechStrong TV.
Thanks for having me.
My pleasure. Curtis, we've interviewed Armis a few times actually even before TechStrong TV when we were in person at conferences and stuff. But in case people in our audience are not familiar with Armis, why don't we start that? Maybe a little background about Armis and even your own background.
Yeah, sounds great. Thanks for that, Alan. So as you mentioned, Curtis Simpson, CISO at Armis. Just a quick synopsis of my background. So 20 plus years in security and IT. Started out as a practitioner, grew up through various different leadership roles, and have been a global CISO within Cisco Foods and within enterprise just in general. Was a customer of Armis before joining Armis. And to quickly describe Armis, so Armis is a cloud security solution provider. We fundamentally do three key things. We help our customers identify every connected device in their environment and even away from their environment. We then continuously monitor those devices against what we already understand of their expected behavioral profiles based upon a massive knowledge base of over 500 million unique devices around the world. And then as we're continuously monitoring those devices, we're also providing our customers with insights into risks, exposures, advisories in a single pane of glass. And then we're providing insights into active threats, active compromise, and facilitating active response through integrations with existing capabilities in the stack.
Excellent. And that's a great description of it. I will tell you, I first became aware of Armis at an Inside Ignite event in Iceland, actually. I think they had just announced the Insight investment around that time. And so I've been following the company since then. And what an amazing growth trajectory it's been on, even through the craziness, or maybe in spite of or as a result of the craziness of this past year. You guys have just a little bit of both. You're right.
Because the risks are real, and some of those risks have really been enunciated as a result of things like the exposed visibility into the power of attacking supply chains, right? It's truly been underlined as we look at this pandemic. So we've seen a lot of capabilities been built and bolstered and tested and used, and we're seeing more of that as days continue.
Absolutely. And quite frankly, like everything else in security, sometimes we learn the hard way, right? When it takes banging something upside your head until you realize you're doing something wrong here. And of course, we recently had, in the world of IoT and supply chain, we had a breach. You probably know more about it than me. Why don't you tell the audience, and maybe we'll talk about lessons learned.
Yeah, so I think you're referring to the recent Verkada breach, which is interesting, right? And it crosses over a couple interesting territories. So what we're talking about is a super admin credentials for the Verkada landscape, really through their UI having been compromised. And then once that super admin through their UI was compromised, this bad actor was able to get into their platform and access every single device. Beyond that, they were able to, in some cases, use these inherently vulnerable devices as a starting point to start venturing in moving laterally into other areas of other specific customer networks. This exposed a number of interesting things. This continues to enunciate third-party risk as being real, and the need to continue to not just monitor our own use of devices and services, but how our third parties are using and accessing those devices. What this also enunciates is how vulnerable these devices are, and we commonly forget this, and how prevalent they are. Not only have we seen this Verkada breach recently, where these devices were prevalent within many, many, many different customer environments, highly vulnerable devices. Cameras are not new to being vulnerable. We saw a couple years ago was Microsoft who announced that they were tracking APT-28, nation state out of Russia, who was building one of the world's largest botnets we've ever seen out of IoT devices, printers, cameras, and phones. Why? Because we all have them, and they're typically generally vulnerable. They're built as such that they're not configured to be secure. They don't allow you to patch them. They're just inherently vulnerable devices that we're seeing being exploited in many different ways.
And again, let me, I should have said this from the get-go, but I'll say it after the fact. I said it with the SolarWinds, and it's the same thing here. I'm not blaming anyone, and I'm not saying anyone's stupid or unreasonable or negligent or anything like that. It can happen to any one of us. I mean, organizationally. It can happen to any organization. Anybody out there watching this, any of the companies you're working for, you could be next with it. Because if it was so easy, it wouldn't happen. But it's not. It's not easy to defend these things. It's not easy to harden them and figure it out. Whenever I talk about...
The CISO role wouldn't exist, right? It just wouldn't be. It wouldn't be a responsibility that anyone like me had if it was that easy.
It even goes deeper. I've been in security 20 plus years myself, and I remember a company I helped found I was a co-founder, Still Secure. We did a lot of DoD and US Gov work. And actually with some of the folks who were involved with Armis early on, this is before Armis, obviously. I remember meeting with the Department of Interior, right, U.S. Geological Survey. And they had seismic sensors all over the world, on the bottom of the Pacific Ocean to the top of the Himalayas, right? Because they've got to be monitoring, earthquakes and stuff like that. And we spoke to them about securing those devices. And they said, what are you, crazy? We're scientists. The world needs that information. Why would anyone want to attack them? Why would anyone want to bring them down or do something wrong, right? Because that's good for science. And unfortunately, there's still a lot of that attitude out there. Why do I have to worry about security of these IoT devices? They're just running factories after all. Who's going to bother them, right? But, we start there and have to go up, right? And
absolutely. This, to your earlier point, is where a lot of recent interest has been, right? We saw the NSA and CISA warn us last year of what we're very much seeing having become a reality, right? We recently saw Molson Coors breached. They still haven't fully recovered. I've been talking for a while now about this type of event. This type of event is here and it's here to stay. If we look at what's happened to Molson Coors, it was likely a ransomware event that affected their OT floor, meaning that their machine-driven operations that execute critical activities in terms of brewing the actual beverages, in terms of even moving bottles and such around facilities, refrigeration. What I was worried about when I was at Cisco Foods and raised to my board and executives was exactly this type of attack. Because to your point, these IoT devices, these temperature sensors, these predictive maintenance sensors, these IoT devices that are refrigeration units, our OT devices that are PLCs on manufacturing floors, why are they a target? Because you can't recover those devices through a backup, right? If you look at how ransomware has truly evolved, it went from a point where ransomware was affecting our file servers and assets like that. And then we quickly realized, wait a second, if we back them up and secure those backups, when that event happens, we just recover those assets and we're good. We don't even have to pay the ransoms. Well, it's not like the ransomware actors didn't notice. They noticed. They weren't getting paid because backups were being recovered. So what do you do to get past that? You end up impacting devices for which there is no effective backup. So what we're really talking about is a rip and replace scenario, which is why it's taken weeks for this operation to recover. What we're really talking about is an availability event that we should all be concerned about. And the thing to remember, to your point, is if our network is of value to us, if those devices and what they serve is of value to us, it's also of value to a bad actor. Because if it's of value to us and they disrupt it in an unrecoverable state, we will pay.
You do pay. There's no two ways about it. And we're finding this out the hard way. So, there's two schools of thought in my security school. One is an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure. So you do everything you can to prevent these kinds of breaches, these kinds of incidents from happening. The other school of thought is, look, you're never going to prevent everything anyway. Make sure you put some good resources into response, right? Assume something's going to happen. How do we respond? How do I rip and replace if I have to, right? But how do I get away with hopefully not ripping and replacing if I don't have to? And, and they're both valid. There's no right or wrong, Curtis, here, right? You need both, probably. But I'm interested in yours, and you're speaking on behalf of Armis now. What do you do?
The perspective is both, right? Because to your point, the challenge that we're going to run into always as we think about this, even as you think about just not IoT, I've had this conversation for years, is it one or the other or both? It has to be both. I came from an environment that experienced many hundreds of thousands of attacks every year. Well, if we didn't do anything in terms of implementing protection mechanisms, that ultimately would have meant that we were responding to hundreds of thousands of attacks every year versus protecting against most of them, realizing that they happened, and then constantly tuning those protection measures to bolster our capabilities as those tactics, techniques, and procedures were changing in terms of the bad actors. If we look at IoT, there's a number of different things we should be thinking about. IoT, OT, these non-traditional computers, because they are computers, important to remember, is that there's a number of different things we can start with, both tactically and then as we start moving forward strategically. One of the things as we think about where we are today and how open information is, I often recommend that if no one has really started to look at themselves from the outside, start there. Look at open information sources like Shodan, and look at where your OT environment, look at where your IoT devices, look where your OT devices are directly connected to the internet, and where bad actors are being, or where that's being advertised to bad actors as to, you have these devices, they're connected to the internet, they're vulnerable to various different disclosures that have been released in the last couple of years. Therefore, bad actor, go ahead and exploit these devices. We're seeing that pretty continuously, where a bad actor will see recent disclosures, just do a quick Shodan search, see all the companies they can impact, and then execute an attack. We should be taking the similar type of mindset, and sometimes it is that easy to get started. But as you think about this from a long-term approach perspective, it really comes down to monitoring. What you've got to, well, two things: understanding your inventory and then monitoring your inventory. You have to know what you have. If I look at the environment I came from, or you look at many different manufacturing environments, they went from this air-gapped environment to a relatively interconnected environment because the business needs to make rapid decisions based upon the areas within the most critical elements of the business are being executed, which is often that machine shop floor, that manufacturing floor, that critical supply chain floor, whatever that may be. As we think about this going forward, one thing that is very true is these devices, particularly IoT devices, are flowing freely into our environments, often running alongside what matters most to deliver those critical services within our organization. We need to first figure out that they're there. Once we've been able to crawl our environments and understand not just IT devices, but IoT and OT devices, we can then start applying strategies to manage that risk. And there's multiple things that are going to have to be done. I'll commonly hear that, well, I'm just going to segment, right? My strategy is segmentation. Segmentation is part of a strategy, but it should revolve around cyber resilient strategy, which ultimately means I understand what the business cares about most, our most critical services, our most critical solutions, and then I work backwards based upon my visibility to understand what's likely to disrupt them. And it's incredibly important that we realize that our OT devices are running alongside IT and IoT devices with vulnerabilities on the same subnets with line of sight into what matters most. These are part of our attack vectors today that these bad actors, whether it's nation states or script kiddies, are using to move laterally within our environment, executes long-term reconnaissance activities, and get ready to hit that big red button that allows them to execute that ransomware attack of significance. It truly is about those key components. Identify your inventory, monitor your inventory, and then be ready to respond when something goes sideways. So your point about response, that response doesn't need to be an orchestrated or a systematic response, but you at least need to assume that IoT and OT will be compromised, understand the actors that are going to need to play a role in that response, the technologies that need to play a role in the response, and test your capability to respond. And that test will help you understand your gaps and help you focus on the gaps. You do not want to get into a situation where you're responding for the first time when your machine room floor, your manufacturing floor has been impacted, because that's a Molson Coors event as we're seeing right now.
Agreed. Curtis, we're running low on time. For people who want to find out more, learn more, dive in more, maybe about Aramis specifically, or about the general topic here. I know you guys had a pretty good white paper you had done, right?
We've got
how can they get to it?
Some great white papers, some great blog articles. So on armis.com and under our resources section, really good resources. Speaking to there's even a blog around the Molson Coors, recent Molson Coors attack. We got a number of blogs around even the recent water facility attack. And then white papers around how you can tactically and strategically think about addressing some of these challenges we've talked today. Again, armis.com and under our resources.
Excellent. Hey, Curtis, thanks for coming on. This is your first time on TechStrong TV, I'm pretty sure.
Indeed.
Well, don't be a stranger. Come back on. This is a good topic our audience is interested in, and I'd love to talk to you more about it.
I'd love to be back.
All right. Curtis Simpson, CISO at Armis here on TechStrong TV. We're going to take a quick break. We'll be right back with another fantastic guest.
Devops.com is the #1 online destination for DevOps education and community building. Devops.com covers all aspects of DevOps, including DevOps best practices and tools, DevOps culture, DevSecOps, business impact, continuous testing, continuous delivery, and more. Devops.com has the largest collection of original DevOps content, featuring breaking news, blog posts, podcasts, and more. Visit www.devops.com to learn more. Devops.com, where the world meets DevOps.
All right, welcome back, everybody. Next up, we have Derek Langone, who's the president of Digital AI. He and Alan talk about the latest survey that Digital AI has done on digital transformation and some of the results of that survey, and they are certainly eye-opening, to say the least. It's a great conversation. Let's get to it.
This is Digital Anarchist.
Hey everyone, thanks for joining us on another TechStrong TV segment. My guest this segment is a friend of mine who I haven't had a chance to talk to in almost a year now, maybe more than a year. He's moved from Boston to Florida, right down here near me, and I'm thrilled to have him on. He is the president of Digital AI, Derek Langone. Hey Derek, welcome to TechStrong TV.
Alan, thank you. Nice to have you. Nice to have you have me on today, and also the endorsement of moving to Florida. That's been a big lifestyle change and a positive one.
Good, absolutely. Look, I recommend it to everyone. I'm here about 18 years now, but it's good to have you down here. But moving down to Florida this year wasn't the only thing you've been up to, right? It's been a crazy busy year for Digital AI. 2 or 3 or 4 mergers, forming the new company with the name, working with Ashok and the folks at was it TGP Capital? Is that
TPG Capital? Yeah. Right. So you're absolutely right, Alan. It's five companies that came together in the last year, throughout the pandemic. So what's more exciting during a pandemic than putting 5 companies together? But essentially, what we saw in the industry was the real need at the very top of the enterprise spectrum to provide end-to-end orchestration, analytics, and a lot of other discrete functionality, including security and testing, as well as some scalable agile planning. So put all of those 5 pieces together to form Digital.ai. And we serve almost exclusively the Global 5,000, and we're finding an awful lot of traction inside of those organizations as they do a couple of things. Number one, just the routine, activity around digital transformation, and then this pandemic obviously forced, remote work, remote customer service, remote digital products, almost overnight. So helping these organizations to sort of react to that new reality and plan for the future, because I don't think we backslide entirely to where we started a year ago, March.
I don't think we backslide at all, right? I think what we've done as an industry now, right? What we've done over this year is kind of money in the bank, equity that we build on. Right, we're only going to continue marching forward there, and that's part of what gets me excited, Derek. Is everyone's talking about infrastructure spending now at the government level. Within the digital realm and the transformation world, we've invested in a lot of infrastructure this year that doesn't go away when COVID hopefully goes away. Right, companies are going to build on this infrastructure and really start accelerating my, one man's opinion. And I think that's what we're in for. And so companies like Digital AI that enable that and empower organizations to do that are key pieces right? Of this.
You're right, Alan. We've seen a lot of investment. I think, there's been some quotes that, there was in 2 months, 10 years worth of digital transformation that was accomplished, right? And we see that inside of our large organizations that we service. I mean, I've coined the phrase years ago, they're reluctant software companies, right? You can't be a bank or an airline or a manufacturer nowadays at scale without technology playing a fundamental role in your business. So you're right. Our goal as an organization is to enable those companies to be smarter about how they build and deliver their software and all of the sort of discrete functionality that needs to be a part of that, and service, the unique requirements inside of enterprises, because building and delivering software in a small company is very different than trying to do that in a Fortune 100 bank.
Agreed, man. Agreed. So all good stuff. I know you guys recently, I think, did some survey and analysis with some interesting findings, and we were going to talk a little bit about that today. You want to jump in?
Absolutely. So just to set the table with regard to why we did the survey, we're trying to be a responsible vendor, and basically instead of just assuming what the market needs and what our customers need and sort of the evolution of not only our products and our strategy, we from time to time, take the approach of really trying to intrinsically elicit information from our customers, both in sort of live conversations as well as surveys, to just get either a validation that some of our theories are correct or make a course correction based on feedback that comes back. So yes, we did a survey to talk to customers recently, basically about digital transformation and their sort of efforts around that and their success and failures around that.
Very cool. So I having done plenty of surveys myself, there's layers and layers and layers you find out in these surveys. Derek, we only got 15, 20 minutes to do it in. So I'm going to ask you, give me let's start with the top 3 things, if you will. Top 3 findings that I think you think will interest the audience. And if we have time, we'll dive in beyond that. But let's start with that for now and see where it takes us. Is that okay?
Yes, absolutely. So in terms of top 3, and you can ask a question, Alan, or would you like me to talk about
I was going to say,
okay.
Go ahead, man. It's yours.
Yeah. So what came back that was the most interesting and some of the fundamental questions we asked were things like, have you started digital transformation, right? Seems like an obvious question that you get an obvious yes answer. However, the results were mixed, right? What we expected is somewhat what we saw. 95% of customers have said, hey, yes, we are involved in some level of digital transformation. But we had just under 10% of customers say we haven't even started, right?
Wow.
And we dug a little deeper to try to, diagnose why that was the case. And in most situations, it was either a very small percentage that, hey, we don't think that's a requirement for our business, which was very, very myopic. But most of the feedback for the folks that haven't started yet is, man, we just don't even know where to start, right? We feel like, we're at the bottom of a mountain and we've got to make a climb. So that was interesting to hear. And those are obviously situations where we'd like to get ourselves engaged because we think we're an enabler and an accelerator. But what came back with regard to companies that have started their digital transformation is some positives that, hey, we've seen some early results. We've definitely streamlined some operations. We're delivering, services faster. We're able to do, some feedback looping. But more than 50% of those customers that have engaged heavily in digital transformation said, man, we are identifying a ton of shortcomings, right? That we're falling well short of the projected results. We are finding that we're not delivering services anywhere near the velocity that we need to. Our customers are now demanding in this new reality. And most of the feedback that was really eye-opening for us is customers feeling like we're just flying without instruments, right? We're making investments, we're guessing where we should put energy and resourcing, and yet we don't really have any statistical confirmation or any data to confirm our thesis.
Yeah. Derek, one of the interesting observations I've made, and also it was justified for me in a McKinsey survey that I saw. McKinsey did a great survey, large organizations on this, is the rich get rich and the poor get poorer. And companies that were already investing in digital transformation before this past year, companies that were going down that path, what they did is they accelerated their already existing plans. They doubled down, right? And because they were already down that path, they were already aware of things, they tended to know what they didn't know or what they thought they didn't know versus companies that didn't know what they didn't know, right? And are finding it out the hard way. Companies that weren't already doing digital transformation that said, oh my goodness, the world's changed, I got to do it, and tried to like pivot on a dime like that, they're having a really hard time because they were.
We saw a lot of that in our own customer base, right? The companies that had made investments that built some muscle memory that they could sort of build on the foundational success that they had, they went much faster and they were able to keep up with customer demand. They were able to absorb the new reality that all of their employees were now working from home, right? Versus, other companies, like you said, that hadn't really started yet or had sort of willy-nilly invested, you can't put in those building blocks overnight, and they really face that consequence. And frankly, a great example, and I won't use names, so, we got a bunch of airline customers, a couple that come to mind, one of which just went faster. I mean, obviously the whole industry was hit, right? But one of our customers was able to really absorb this new reality, to make a lot of pivots in their business, to streamline, to cut costs, things like that. And another, came to us early in the pandemic and said, man, we are so behind the curve. Can you help here? And certainly we helped, but I think the challenge was that they had to put in so many pieces before we could really get the flywheel moving. That they're still, I would say, if you had a conversation with them, they would admit that we are still well behind where we would have hoped to have been by this point.
Agreed, 100%. The difference is I'm staying the course. I'm just going faster, maybe, or I'm doubling down, versus I'm doing a 90-degree turn or a 45-degree turn, and everything that's entailed. The larger the organization, the harder it is to turn. Right, and you get that, no doubt about it.
And there's real costs here. I think that's the thing that's overlooked, is that when we look at our customers, you take a typical bank, their number 3 line item in expense is building software, right? That's behind personnel costs and sort of capital infrastructure, right? So it's not a small line item in a budget, and yet we see sort of varying levels of investment and varying levels of sort of methodology and playbook that get run.
I got to comment on that. I think, and I got this out of that McKinsey thing again, Derek. The issue is because 3 years ago, most of those organizations viewed that budget, the top 3 priority for that budget was how do I cut it? Right? Yeah. How do I get the same amount of things for less money? Or how can I do with a little less but spend less money? They viewed IT as a cost factor, not a profit generator, right? Companies that view that investment in software as a profit generator understand that cutting that money isn't smart. If anything, you may want to spend more money.
I think it's repurposing money. What we find is there's not necessarily a need to cut costs, but it's to understand, what am I getting from my dollars, right? What's my return on investment? Can I possibly get some more instrumentation and visibility, so I just know where to put resourcing, right? Because not everything is a good return on investment, and not everything's efficient, right? So some of the technology that we try to bring to bear is collecting data that can then be produced in a way, can be published in a way that it's actionable, to just show you obvious things like where you're very inefficient and there's some low-hanging fruit opportunities to resolve some of that inefficiency, and then to start building some scorecards that you can then measure over time to just, at a higher level and a more sort of statistical level, gauge your return on investment. Because look, it's a big line item, and I think any person that's financially minded in these organizations wants to do what is necessary, but do that within the confines of a budget.
Absolutely. Derek, I'm glad I only picked 3 things, because you and I'd be on here all day if it was more. Let's jump to number 2. What else you got on there?
Yeah, just COVID's impact. It's something that it's on the top of everyone's tongue, right? What did COVID do to your business? And a lot of the feedback around that in the survey was reflective of what you've said, that customers had admitted, look, we were very well prepared, so it was just a matter of putting more gas on the fire that was already lit. And then other customers, man, this really caught us not necessarily by surprise, because it caught everybody by surprise, but what we realized quickly was our company was not in a prepared state to pivot to the degree that was necessary. So I think that was insightful, not entirely surprising, but insightful. The level of detail and, frankly, the level of sort of transparency among these customers to admit how far behind they still feel that they are, right?
Oh, absolutely.
And I think that was, that's something that, look, the pandemic, we certainly hope with vaccinations and other things that it resolves itself. But what I think is on everyone's mind that's a leader in an organization is, okay, let's assume we get through this, and we think we will, right? What could be next, right? Could this happen again? Could something similar happen again that forces the business to have, sort of an overnight responsibility to react to something that was never forecasted, right? And I think
Agreed.
What we've seen in this survey is companies are trying to take, whether they're behind or they feel like they're keeping pace with the current reality, they're trying to build for the future, right? And sort of insulate themselves in some level, using technology largely to prepare themselves for, what could be around the corner. So that was interesting.
Yeah, I'll add to that. Darry, you started off, you said about 10% of the companies really haven't done anything on digital transformation for a couple of different reasons, meaning 90% have. But to the point you just made here, with COVID and everything, even the 90% who have, when you look at what percentage of their operation, of their infrastructure, they've transformed, quote unquote transformed. And whether that means move it to the cloud or digitize what was analog, or supply chain versus delivery of goods and all of that, it's still not, they haven't 100% transformed. In some cases, they're only 20, 30, well less than half digitally transformed, which for a company like Digital AI, that's a huge opportunity as well, right? Because these companies being 20% or 25% digital is not going to be enough as we go forward here.
Well, it's a good point. It's not my third point, because I do have a separate third point, but I'll hang on that for a moment. Some of the feedback we got in the survey was that 22% of the respondents felt they were finished with digital transformation, which we thought was interesting, given that I think it's akin to like buying a house. You're never done renovating it when you own a house, right?
Yeah, I wouldn't buy stock in those 22%, but that's me.
So that was a statistic that was interesting, and we certainly want to dig deeper there. But most companies came back with what we somewhat expected, which is, hey, we've invested in digital transformation. We feel like we're less than halfway through. We're making some progress, but we don't see a finish line necessarily. This becomes just sort of an iterative process that we go through. So, and what further came back was just prioritization, because you're absolutely right. These a lot of the companies that we surveyed and that we service are very large, right? So it's impossible to sort of have a boil the ocean approach to digital transformation. So they set priorities, either by business unit or some other mechanism, and we found that in their highly prioritized digital transformation efforts, they've made more progress certainly than the whole. So, but I think the most eye-opening statistic was the 22% that feel like, yep, check the box, we're finished.
Absolutely. Yeah, bad move. All right,
so
number three,
my third point. Yeah, my third point is security vulnerabilities. We asked this question in a lot of different ways, and just sort of taking the reality of the pandemic and how much what were internally consumed applications had to be customer facing overnight. That is on the minds and really a high concern for most of the IT leadership feedback that we got, which is we're worried about the fact that we had to, not only for our existing our employees, but also our customers, start to deliver applications remotely, deliver digital services almost overnight, and frankly, to keep up with the pace of the requirement, we feel like we potentially cut some corners, particularly in the area of security. So I think that vulnerability, there's a lot of catch up that's now being played.
Well, there's a lot of exposure out there too, right? I mean, look, again, I saw another survey where they thought it would take the better part of a year to move totally remote, and these organizations moved 100% remote in 10 days, right? And that's fantastic, great. God bless, thank God for all of that. But that wasn't done without cutting corners, and unfortunately, I think a lot of those corners, Derek, are around security, people, process, and technology. And I hope it doesn't come back to bite us this year.
Well, I think you're right that there's no way you can do the same amount of work in much less time without cutting some corners. So security was certainly one of those things that was not purposefully sidestep, but probably sidestep. And I think these companies are realizing not only that maybe some steps were skipped, but the reality is if you make an application, sort of customer facing, and it leaves your data center, right, and it's out there in the wild, the landing plane for penetration, goes up exponentially. So even if you've got some security that was working fine when you controlled everything, that same security is not as capable once something gets out in the wild. So that is something that we bring to bear. We've got an incredible application security component of our platform, and something that we're solving for with some customers already that have sort of raised their hand and said, we were fine until this new reality hit, and we had to do things much differently and relinquish a lot of control of where our applications are running, and now we need to solve for that.
Agreed. Derek, I could have, someone would ask me, are you guys going to go overtime, Derek and Alan, on the thing? Yeah, I would have been a good bet. But we're overtime. But for people who want to get more information on the survey, where can they go?
Or easy, www.digital.ai.com.
All right, man. Hey, first of all, welcome to Florida. A little late, but welcome to Florida. As soon as the world gets to normal, let's get together and we'll toast to both being down here. But in the meantime, man, keep doing what you're doing. Best of luck to you and the whole digital AI team. And don't be a stranger. Come back on soon.
Sounds good, Alan. Well, thanks very much. Nice to be here, and we'll see you soon.
All right. Derek Langone, President, Digital AI, here on TechStrong TV. We're going to take a break, and we'll be right back with our next guest.
ContainerJournal.com is the leading online destination for centralized computing-related content. ContainerJournal.com covers all aspects of software containers, from container management, data management for containers, container security, networking for containers, to the entire container ecosystem, Kubernetes, microservices, serverless, and more. ContainerJournal.com has the largest selection of container-related news, featuring breaking news, blog posts, podcasts, and more. Visit www.containerjournal.com to learn more. ContainerJournal.com is operated by MediaOps Inc., the team behind Devops.com, Digital Anarchist, SecurityBoulevard.com, DevOps Connect, and DevOpsDozen.com.
All right, welcome back. Next up, we have the Haunted Hacker Podcast with Mike Jones. He talks with Chris Fistrunk, who is the technical manager at Mondiant, and they talk about all things Scada and Scada security. Fascinating topic, a fascinating conversation. The beginning of it is cut off, but still totally worth your time to listen to. So let's get to it now.
These things, water, like I said, go watch How It's Made, all those episodes, you'll see all that stuff.
Very cool.
High speed equipment, hopefully that answers your question.
Absolutely.
At a higher level. Yeah,
absolutely. And I think with Raspberry Pis that came out too, IoT and even, some of the Scada stuff is easier to mess with, because now we have, stuff like the Raspberry Pi and GPIO boards and stuff like that to mess with. So that's really interesting. I think Scada is probably one of the more interesting fields to get into when it comes to security, that and aviation. And I really want to dive off into satellite and space. It seems like that's probably one of the most popular places right now that SpaceX is up off the ground. So I'm going to open this up to 4 questions. The chat is open. So if you guys want to dump questions into the chat for Chris, and Ryan, if you have anything, you guys speak up. And
what's the biggest misconception about ICS you face when trying to explain it to people?
I don't know if there's any misconception, but a lot of times people will assume that, it's something you can just change, like on IT systems, like, hey, we can get a new computer every 5 years. Can't just do that with a control system, right? It has to be physically re-engineered. Like you're having to do electrical engineering, mechanical engineering, chemical engineering, all that stuff has to be baked back into it because it's controlling that process. And so you can't just change something on a dime like you can with IT. Just download a new app. Okay, great, no problem. And some of the same technologies that at IT, they don't necessarily work in control system environments because there's different protocols and different other constraints. Like if you get malware on a PLC, you can't just re-image it or wipe it. You might have to replace it. So things like that.
Why is that? What's so special about PLC firmware that you can't just reinstall it or?
Well, again, it's you can. There are some cases, but again, some of them. What if it's so impacted? Like and you take a case like Stuxnet, everything's pwned. You can't trust it. You might have a hidden bootloader in that system, so you can't trust it, right? And back then, things weren't digitally signed. They didn't have digitally signed firmware. They didn't have digitally signed anything. Now you're starting to see control systems that won't authenticate unless there's a hardware token matching the other hardware token in that frame where the PLC plugs in. So, yeah.
There was one question on here from Rick. He just sent it to me. He says, could Chris possibly explain the concept of air gapping and how effective is it really to preventing a cyber attack against a system?
All right. So yes, air gapping works, but when some people, especially folks in upper management, send to say air gap, they don't know what they're talking about. So an air gap means there's no connection period outside of that control system network. If you have, let's think of a simple one. You might have a PLC that's controlling an escalator, and it stands alone. And the only way to change it is you have to go there to change the settings on it. That's air gapped. That means there's no other things connected to it. Now, there's temporary connections when someone connects a laptop to make a change or things like that, but that's generally what we talk about when it's air gapped. Now, the large, most of the control systems are not. And there might be firewalls that's in between IT and OT, or data diodes, or unidirectional gateways, or sneaker net, a lot of back and forth on USBs. But the ones that are really effective are control systems where they don't allow mobile devices at all. They ban them. They do it like x-rays of your backpack of when you go in. They don't allow any USBs. They don't allow any other thing unless it's signed off to the T. If you combine that with very strong physical security, that's a very secure system. And now I've seen some where they didn't do a physical assessment and someone has, like a keypad and, badge reader keypad. But if you look under the badge reader, it's got the PIN number that someone wrote underneath and it lets you in, So you have to have good physical security and an actual air gap where it's not connected. Otherwise, there's going to be a way in.
Yeah, for sure.
As an attacker.
So for those interested, okay. So another question I had as far as air gapping, right? So have you seen a lot of activity when you're talking about industrial systems and SCADA and the different PLCs, especially out in the field? Do you guys see a lot of RF tampering?
It depends. If it's in a public area, sure. You'll see, just people trying to connect to stuff or whatever. But if you're out in the middle of nowhere, Texas, and you got wet, it's probably not going to be an issue. It's something that needs to be fixed, right? But
what's really cool is some of the applications I've messed with SCADA. you can actually, this is how I got into Scada really, is going to some of the places that had like the interfaces for the PLCs and getting demo copies of that software and setting up my own stuff and just messing with my own shit. And was like, okay, this is kind of cool. You know, there's processes behind it. I had someone ask me a really funny question one time. They're like, how do you get Windows updates on Scada systems? I was like, I don't know. If you're worried about updating a Scada system with Windows patches, we definitely need to talk and have a pen test. But yeah, I think the majority of the people coming into security don't know a lot about Scada or industrial systems because it's not part of the mainstream security, I think. But I think as time goes by, we're seeing a lot more of Scada and some of that technology come into the prime view. Especially after SolarWinds and Stuxnet and all that stuff. So we had a guy on not too long ago that used to work. He's a retired colonel for Israeli Defense Forces, and he worked on their cyber defense team. And we got to talking about Stuxnet. So what is your take on Stuxnet? Do you believe that the U.S. is involved, or do you believe it was strictly Israeli?
Yeah. I don't know personally because I don't have any visibility into that, but I mean, that's Ralph Wagner has a great TED talk about it, even though he got some things wrong in it. He went back and did another video about it, but his analysis of it was spot on. He did the full reverse engineering. He actually figured out how the malware works. So check out, there's To Kill a Centrifuge is a white paper he wrote. I can go grab the link. Anyway, it's a great thing. Nation states, they have the capability, and there's the only ones that we're really seeing this type of malware from.
I think they used that same malware on another compromise not too long ago, but it's an old version, a later version of Stuxnet. But that malware seemed to make its rounds through oil and gas and some other stuff as well. They also had some malware that was aimed at shipping as well. Shipping, I think, is another interesting area to look at security. Is big cargo ships and automated shipping and the systems they use on those crafts. And I know Rick probably knows a lot more about that than I do. Rick is one of our listeners. He's really involved in super yachting and security on super yachts. But a lot of like transportation, the curriculum structure, stuff like that is really just interesting. And I was always jealous of the guys that got to work in the Scada stuff coming into security because I didn't have any access to that. I had, ideas and I had some background in electric and stuff like that. But, Scada is a totally different world.
It's definitely more expensive. You can't just go buy a brand new controller for a power plant. They're starting at like 25 grand. So, but you can get little things like Phoenix Contact, little PLCs for maybe $1,000. Might be able to get. I have this all covered in that Hacker Halted talk. I tell you, some PLC kits that you can get or make.
Cool. I'm actually thinking about building a sort of like a smart city and have like systems built into it for power and light and electric, water, transportation, all that stuff. But it's going to be kind of like a CTF, but it's actually going to be a physical village, right? So, like during Christmas time, they have like the snow villages, right? We're going to build an actual village or a city with all the components that you would see like in a major city. And, take turns hacking it and making lights go on and off and some good stuff. But that's coming down the pipe. So a little bit about what we do, Chris, with the Haunted Hacker. Like, it's an open community, and we just give back knowledge. Like, if you go into our Discord, you see like we have probably 50 sections full of cool stuff and just neat little like memes and educational stuff, and it's a really good group. And so I think that what's that? Go ahead, Ryan.
Knowledge for everyone. Anyone who's keen to learn.
Yeah, for sure. So that's kind of what we do. I'm going to steal some of these links from you and put them into the Discord for some of the new people to check out. And also, go ahead.
Yeah. Also, too, anytime you have you hear of a conference, you might hear us talking about it in the ICS security folks. You might us hear talk about the beer ISAC. I know you put that in the link. I was a co-founder of the beer ISAC. There's all these different ISACs: water ISAC, oil and gas. Well, we created one called beer ISAC. Means that you just get together with someone who knows and you're sharing information. You don't necessarily have to drink beer or whiskey, or you can drink water or coffee. It can be breakfast ISAC, just getting together, sharing knowledge, just like what we're doing here. And that's the great thing about it, is because that's how we learn. That's how we grow. And oftentimes the beer ISAC is way better than the official ISACs in sharing information. So,
yeah, the official channels are a little difficult, especially when I worked in oil and gas. The official channels in oil and gas were so difficult to get knowledge and information from. It's ridiculous. So let's see. That's about it for the questions. Chris, you have any questions for me or the group or for Ryan? No,
it's like, so I'm on Discord, but I haven't joined your Discord yet. I think I have every chat program known to man. Mm-hmm. Because of the pandemic. You have, what are you on? I don't know. I'm on Google Plus, whatever. Well, tell me about the different channels you have in your Discord and things like that.
Sure. So we started the Discord shortly after we started the Haunted Hacker. And originally it was just going to be a place for the people in the group to hang out and socialize or whatnot. But I just made a decision to open that up to the public, and we had it open for a while. And during one of the podcasts, we got attacked through Discord. We since fixed that problem, and we made it invite only. And we share, the Discord invites with people that we can verify. We know who they are, and they're good people, whatever. So some of the sections we have stuff for mental health. People don't want to, go to the public and try to find somebody to talk to. They can always talk to people, colleagues, whatnot, to get any kind of support or whatever. We have places for vulns, code. We have CTF fund. We have merchandise, of course, and we have like material for testing, study guides, stuff like that, free courses, stuff for women in tech, forensics, really anything you could possibly think of within security that might be a topic we have. I don't know if we have industrial control systems. I would hope we do. If not, I'm sure I'll add it. What's that, Ryan?
No, we definitely do, man. Definitely.
Cool. So yeah, like they do a good job of adding stuff all the time. I mean, I'll jump on the Discord every once in a while and I'll peek in, and there's always somebody adding some really cool content or a new tool that, new exploit code. So that's basically it. We don't charge anything to anybody. We don't, there's no pay service. It's all just a really open community and really good group of people. I really like that.
That's awesome.
I like that T-shirt, by the way. The P caps or it never happened. That's epic.
Yeah, actually, I was wearing a different shirt. I'm like, what? I'm going to be on camera. I need to wear a cool shirt. So this is one of my favorite sayings too, right? And I actually wore this in my DEF CON talk. And I've had it for a while, so it's kind of cool. But no, I'm just glad someone thought to have me on a podcast. And Mike, I haven't seen you literally in 10 years. You're looking great.
You too, man. You too. Congrats on the baby, bro. Congrats on the baby.
Yeah. And, we'll have to catch up more. And anyone that, if you follow me on Twitter, feel free to reach out to me, or on Discord now. I join the thing. So cool. Glad to share, because, who knows? I'm Frenchie asked, I'll just type in.
I don't think we're too far from you, actually.
Come on down the trace. Come on down that trace.
Cool.
Off the mountain.
Yeah, off the mountain for sure.
So it's like lots of thing, lots of good things that y'all are doing, sharing information. creating things, doing new ideas. I don't know how long I'll be doing security, but as long as it keeps being fun and having a lot of fun things to do, meeting great people, that's great. For me, one day I'll probably retire and just get on a tractor and just drive that around.
There you go.
Be a Luddite,
Yeah, I got to say, security in general, the industry is a really great industry. I think we're pretty lucky to have the industry that we do and the people we have, because the majority of the people in our industry are really cool and just genuine people. But then, of course, just like any industry, you got to have your knuckleheads that cause problems and make it tough for everybody else. But yeah, man, it was great having you on. And dude, you're welcome in the Discord 24/7. And, if you want to jump on the podcast anytime, it's every Saturday. Throw you a co-host, and you can toss on your video and help us interview people and, just make a community effort. But I really appreciate it, dude. It was really good catching up with you, and the best with the baby, and congrats to the family, man. I really appreciate it.
Hey, I appreciate it very much. And to Mike and Ryan and all the others who asked questions and stuff. I think this is the second official podcast I've ever been on.
Nice.
I've been in security for a really long time. And we did a Beer ISAC one, but it hasn't even been published yet. So y'all actually might be my first InfoSec or security or hacker related podcast.
Oh, we will be, because it'll go up either tonight or tomorrow. So we'll definitely be the first. Right. But like I said, anytime, stop by. Anybody else have any questions before I end this? I'm going to shut it down. Also, Chris, let's talk about doing another podcast later on, and maybe do a Scada project, you and I, if you have time, and do a podcast down the road on that project. I think it'd be pretty cool. And Ryan, you can jump in, because I think that there's more people here that are interested in Scada and PLC and industrial systems than just me and Ryan.
It's a great field to specialize in, because there's so much opportunity. There's probably not a business out there that doesn't have some kind of automation like that, even if it's building automation. Mm-hmm. So the sky's the limit, and people are hiring all over. We just hired a new person. We'll probably have more openings later this year. Just the same with every other control system specific company that has security, control system security, even pen testing. We do lots and lots of pen testing. So,
nice.
Keep those skills going, and you're gonna people that are interested in that field are gonna find lots of good fun work to do. So
cool, absolutely. Ryan, did you have something else you want to add real quick before we jump off?
No, man, all good.
Good, and it's good to see you back again, Ryan. Too. It seems like it's been forever since I've seen you. Good to see you doing good. Mate. Yeah. All right, guys. I will see you guys next weekend, and look for this on TechStrong TV, Digital Anarchist, and on YouTube. And I'll send you those links, Chris, and y'all have a good one.
All right. Adios. Sounds great. Have a good weekend.
Hiring great DevOps and cyber talent is a huge challenge for technical teams. Cloud transformation is driving demand higher. You've tried doing it yourself. Job boards, LinkedIn, didn't work. Recruiters are an option, but who do you trust and not waste your time and money? Recruit Ops is the new way to source engineering talent. From Media Ops, the people behind Devops.com, Security Boulevard, Container Journal, and more. We sit right in the middle of the hottest positions in Dev, Sec, and Ops, and the brightest minds in the field. If you're looking for a great position or the talent to fill it, we can help you. Trust us, risk-free.
All right, welcome back, everybody. Next up, we have our Something Old segment, which is from the recent Predict 2021 virtual summit. We have Chris Weber, who's the VP of Marketing at Styra. He talks about cloud native and how it's transforming the IT core. Digital transformation is here, guys, and cloud native is here as well. And between the two of them, IT environments will never be the same. It's a great presentation. Let's get to it now.
Hi, I'm Chris from Styra. Thanks for joining as I walk through Styra's top 5 predictions for 2021. Now, a little bit about me. I started my career way back documenting APIs as part of an engineering team back when there were like 11 APIs to document, and then moved into IT security, ending up as part of the network team at a public company where I had to sit across the table from auditors who were trying to make sure that we were following the right rules, securing our customers and our prospects' data in the right way. I switched over to the dark side, the vendor side in cybersecurity, where part of my job is to look for new trends, new risks, things that we can help to solve as our transformation from monolithic applications to containerized cloud native applications is underway. And Styra is right at the center of that. Why do we think we're qualified to really make these predictions? Well, we're looking at ways to get security right for the cloud native world. We think policy and authorization needs a rethink in order to really address the scale and the speed at which applications are being deployed and developed right now. We've seen the shift from monolithic apps into cloud native. We know folks are trying to optimize time to market, get more done, use more automation. In fact, we see that more than ever before this year as we move into 2021, thanks to the explosion in remote work that was necessitated by the events of last year. And we're committed to a world where you don't have to sacrifice security for efficiency. We can actually balance both of those. Maybe for the first time ever, certainly for the first time in my career, security is no longer at odds with speed, with performance. We get our perspective from a couple of different places here at Styra for our 5 predictions for 2021. The first is that we're the creators of Open Policy Agent, which means we have consistent communication with a really large and diverse cloud native community. We're really lucky to have that. OPA provides developers with a common policy language, a tool set, a framework for policy across the whole cloud native stack. We've got 35 million downloads. Like I mentioned, a super diverse community, thousands of users that are talking to Styra all the time, sharing their information, asking for help, also providing a lot of contributorship to the project. New code, new solutions, new use cases that are being allowed by that community and being integrated and driven by the community as new problems come up in the security space. So OPA provides that context-aware policy evaluation across the stack, and we hear about it from the whole community. So we get a lot of perspective from them. We also get a good amount of perspective from our commercial side as well. We provide a control plane for the largest implementations of OPA, where we talk to the global Fortune, 100 all the way down to 100 user companies, but enterprises who are solving this problem at scale. So Styra DAS helps the very large folks and helps the enterprise folks implement OPA and implement security, helps us see where enterprises' minds are at. Open Policy Agent across everywhere helps us see where developers' minds are at across different verticals and industries. And what we've seen from those two groups is that there really is going to be a transformation of the IT core as we move into 2021. This open source community, this enterprise customer base has really shown us that as we're moving from monolithic to a microservices architecture, sure, we get all the speed benefits, we get the architectural benefits, we get the reliability and uptime and availability benefits. We get speed and security together, but we also get a lot of, new trends that are coming that introduce new things to think about, right? Certainly what we're going to see is an introduction of open source tools in a big way. We're going to see enterprises shifting wholesale to new strategies of app development as they're building new apps. So certainly there's always going to be those legacy apps that exist, but as we're making these predictions, we're going to be looking at the new apps, the stuff that's being developed in the cloud, in containers. And we're going to see that I think there's going to be some broad changes across the enterprise, not just limited to technology, but also kind of the way that teams work, the people and process side of this. So with that, I'll jump into our 5 predictions here. The first of which is the new stack is just going to become the stack, right? Software-defined infrastructure is going to move out past just the platform team, the development team. Now, this might not be earth-shattering, but I'll show and talk through a couple of reasons why this happens. But in 2021, we're going to see the traditional IT organization, the groups like I used to work in, continue to get their arms around cloud native computing. They're going to have to, right? What we saw in the past, for example, when lines of business, maybe 10 years ago, started seeing SaaS, software as a service apps, as something that they could go use out in the cloud. They called it shadow IT, right? The IT organization was no longer in the driver's seat of what applications were being run in the enterprise. Well, now it's platform as a service, infrastructure as a service, and it's the development team, not the HR or the finance team going and picking a turnkey app. It's the development organization building customer apps. But again, we're seeing that similar trend where it's outside of IT's control. No one has to come down to Chris Weber and say, hey, can I have a server? On that server, I want this operating system, this flavor of Linux. Can you secure it for me? Put it behind a firewall, put it behind a proxy, have the layer 7 checking, making sure the right traffic goes to the right places, etc. Developers can just go off, fire something up in the cloud, and start that development, right? Rent the resources and get moving. That's great for speed. It sort of means IT is no longer in control of what's happening out there, but we're going to see that shift change. It doesn't have to be Shadow IT 2.0. Because we've learned the lessons in the past, we saw that the two teams need to work together, and IT learned that some standardization in Shadow IT 1, that meant things like SAML and OAuth, getting control over who can access those cloud apps. In this new version, we don't need to bolt something on at the end. We can find ways to secure what we see in this diagram here. Everything from the pipeline all the way through the cloud itself can be managed with policy solutions that are going to bring those two teams, the development side, the security side, closer together, right? This is going to be done because privacy regulations are going to get more prevalent. We've already seen that happening with GDPR, with some of the California laws that are happening. Architects are going to have a stronger voice in this. They're going to have a more direct influence to say, here's what's going to happen later when the app is developed. And what I mean by later is when governance gets involved, when security gets involved, when a compliance or an auditor is sitting down and saying, prove to me that you've got controls in place that are going to work. This shift over 21 is going to impact a little bit of hiring, we think. It's going to mean that enterprises are going to favor IT employees that have more experience with open source, have a software-defined infrastructure, or certainly software-defined networking background, because right now what we see is who's in control of all of this stuff, right? That's all the question marks that are here. Who's managing it? Who actually is kind of controlling, who can contribute things into Jenkins, for example, in the CI/CD pipeline? Who can control what runs in a cluster? Who can control what services can talk and et cetera as you go through? That is going to become a shared responsibility, perhaps defined in one place and executed in another place. Right now, a lot of this burden rests on the shoulders of DevOps, rests on the shoulders of the platform team, the site reliability engineers, and some of the app developers as well. I think we need to distribute that across. Let those people be excellent at providing the platform, defining the platform, executing it should be done in two different places. So that's the first thing. We're going to see this cloud native new stack become the stack, and we're going to have to see that that burden gets shared across more people in the teams. Now, part of what's going to drive this, the other prediction, and this is again something that we've seen happening over the last few years, it's going to really accelerate here. Kubernetes is going to continue to skyrocket. It's the platform for managing all these things. We saw last year 91% of enterprises were using Kube, and 83% were using it in production, according to the CNCF, a survey that was done of their user base. We're going to see even more clusters going into production in 2021, and that means we're going to start seeing Kubernetes become more familiar to more people. Now, that's great for the platform teams. That's great for applications and cloud growth. That's all being driven, of course, by this remote work that we're going to be continuing to see over the course of 2021. What it also does mean, though, is that those external regulation bodies, the auditors, the QSAs, they're going to be getting hip to the fact that Kubernetes doesn't just exist. It exists in a lot of enterprises, and that it is an excellent control point, right? When auditors come in and start asking compliance questions, they are not anymore what they used to ask me, which is, do you have a control in place to prevent infiltration? And I could point to a firewall and say, yes. And we were moving on. Those questions now are, how confident are you that the controls you have in place to prevent X kind of attack or X kind of data loss are going to be effective against this or that? Now, that confidence level is going to move into Kubernetes. Kubernetes has great role-based access control if you want to do it, right? Or a way to hook into it. It's got admission control to prevent the wrong kinds of things from running inside of a cluster. Auditors are going to get aware of that. They're going to start looking in here and saying, how confident are you you've got your clusters configured the right way to prevent these kinds of risks or attacks? So we're going to see that trend start here in 2021 and continue for the next few years. Similarly, we're going to see that microservices are going to be a continued focus area, and service mesh is going to become critical over 2021. According to that same survey I talked about, the CNCF survey that said 91% of folks are using Kube and 83% are in production, 27% of companies in 2020 were using service mesh in production, which doesn't sound as high. Of course, it's not as high, but that represented a 50% increase from the year before. And we saw almost 25% of people evaluating service mesh last year. That's going to result in a lot of deployments this year to try to control lateral movement between services, right? If nothing else, it's going to control what can happen, both from just make my app work, right? The front end should talk to the back end in these specific ways, but also prevent data from filtering its way, or bouncing its way through different services and making its way out to be exfiltrated by an attacker. These numbers are going to rise. We're going to see more service mesh being done. Enterprises are going to look for more to do with their service mesh. This will go into sort of giving away one of my next predictions a little bit. But beyond pure container management, it's going to be how can we regulate this, control it, get some operational excellence out of it. And we may also begin to see some consolidation within the space. I've listed a couple of things here on the slide, but the service mesh space is large, and we think that it might be better to consolidate, try to get a single control point that works with different proxies in different places. And similarly, we think we're going to see auditors starting to get hip here too, to the fact that, hey, this is a place where controls can exist. And so if those controls exist, how confident are we that they're actually doing what they're supposed to, for example, prevent that lateral movement or data exfiltration or an unauthorized service from having access to private data or customer data that's in a database? Expect to see those kinds of questions being asked. Again, why we're going to be sharing the burden of security across those teams who are used to sitting with those auditors and not just putting all this burden on a DevOps shoulder when they need to be building and maintaining the availability of excellent platforms and apps. Now, moving away a little bit, we're going to see another trend, which is generally the one I was kind of giving away there. Open source is going to begin to be consolidated as well. Now, we saw it out on Twitter last year, 2021, in a lot of different places. A lot of the kind of luminaries in the cloud native space mentioned something like this, sometimes in a funny way, sometimes in a dead serious way. But if you just look at what we've got up here, the Cloud Native Computing Foundation overall landscape, there's over 1,500 different tiles that they're willing to represent here to show the diverse community and project set that is out there in cloud native today. It's excellent to see so much happening to foster this innovation. It's atypical to see it all in one place, that's for sure. But 95% of IT leaders, in fact, are saying open source is strategically important to them. 77% plan to ramp up their use of open source. This isn't the development side of the house where that's just common. This is the more traditional IT side of the house, still espousing and embracing that open source. Now, this is too much for any one person to manage. Again, the poor DevOps person, the poor platform person that has to be an expert in 1,500 tools, it's just impossible. I thought about it and I said, maybe if we just look at the open source tools inside here, it'd get better. It does get better, but it doesn't get manageable. That's a lot to know, right? So what we think we're going to see is consolidation amongst these projects, or at least better integration, so that perhaps if your control point is Project A, you can control projects B, C, and D in one spot. We're going to see trends towards consistency and unification of languages across all this, of infrastructure across it. It shouldn't be the case that if a DevOps person moves from company A to company B and they're achieving the exact same goal, they're going to do it with 10 completely wholesale different tools. While that is nice for that initial, I'm going to make this just the way we need it, it does start being limiting in being able to know and manage and maintain the platforms that are being built over time. So we're, I think, going to see the sprawl kind of slow down. We're going to see some consolidation here, and standardization is really, I think, going to be the goal to ease ongoing maintenance, ease platform and application deployment, and make sure that this is something that we really can get our head around and not just continue to see new innovation that is helpful, but isolated and siloed in a way that makes it harder to deploy at scale. Moving on and sort of related, we've been hearing a little bit about this for a while, but I think DevOps and DevSecOps have not really come together. I don't think every organization is got the security part of that in. We're going to see DevSecOps truly expand in a meaningful way, I think sort of for the first time in 2021. Certainly there are probably people watching now who go, I'm a DevSecOps person. I've been doing it. What do you mean I'm going to expand it for the first time in a meaningful way? If we look overall at the market in general, certainly the folks that we talk to, there's lots of just DevOps expertise out there for sure. That security piece, the ability to have in mind the kinds of attacks, the kinds of threats, the kinds of risks that are always coming, isn't always thought of up front. It's not always shifted left into the original design of the application. I think that's what I mean here, is we're going to see that shifting left happen. The result is going to be security kind of taking more of a front and center role. Right now, we see folks having to think across these three buckets. There's operational risk. Did I do the right thing? Did we eliminate human error? Are we not leaving ourselves exposed in ways that are going to slow the app down or make it come crashing down and not have the availability we want? There's true security risk, which is based on the kinds of exploits that can happen, the kinds of attacks that can happen, the kinds of risks and threats that we see out there in the world. Have we architected and built and deployed our app in a way to minimize those? And then there's this third one, which is compliance risk, which often gets bucketed in. But as you've heard me talking about, that's more the audit, like, can you prove that you actually built it in a way that's going to be secure? Today, if that's a policies code, for example, a solution that's been built in, that's excellent. That may have the right controls in place. But a lot of times getting your governance, your security, your audit people to actually understand what that is maybe a bridge too far or an extremely manual process. We're going to see changes across all three of these in the way that we monitor and measure to be able to prove that we have the compliance. Our community says that two of the top three container challenges last year were complexity and security. That kind of gets to that first thing, the operational risk with the complexity and security right down the middle. We'll see the compliance continue to grow as more cloud native applications push their way into production and therefore get the scrutiny of external regulators as well. So I think that kind of covers our top, what we were talking about there, right? We've talked about a few different things. We're going to see unprecedented remote work over the next year. We're going to see new technology or relatively new technology maturing that's going to drive new change on the tech space, but the people processes, right? We think of PPT, people processes technology. The people and process is going to catch up to a lot of this technology. And in fact, it's going to mean that some of that technology has to consolidate, get unified, and get controllable in an easier way. That's that transformation of the IT core that I'm talking about. The skill set's going to have to grow. Support of open source, support of the cloud is going to have to become a real core tenet of IT if they're going to remain relevant and if they're going to be able to shift security left and earn their place at the table to be able to say, hey, I can help here to prevent risk by early stage when we're in the architecture. Let's plan for these kinds of risks and let's mitigate them up front by design, not bolt them on at the end with some sort of black box that you try to just put out at the perimeter and hope for the best. Kubernetes is going to skyrocket again. That's probably one where I'm cheating. There's nobody on here that's like, no, I don't think so. That's not a good 2021 prediction. It's certainly the platform for orchestration that we've all seen, and we're going to see that continue. But what that means is it's going to get more scrutiny from those external regulators. So we need to lock it down in a pretty good way, take advantage of all the opportunity that's there to keep ourselves secure. Similarly with service mesh, we're going to see that really hit the mainstream, just as Kubernetes did a couple of years ago. I think service mesh is the next place. So we're controlling the platform, and then we're controlling the services that run inside that platform. What can talk to what can do what. Again, significant open source consolidation. Even in just the things I've mentioned right now, you got to be a Kube and an Envoy expert. That's a lot of expertise for two projects. If you got 12, 16 different things that are out there running, now it's getting difficult. So we're going to look for consolidation and management so that we can go to scale and worry about things like availability, cloud portability, multi-cloud, and not worry about how do I get inside the app and manage all these end little things that are running in there, right? That's why we're going to see security and DevOps see expanded roles and responsibilities to prevent the attacks that come from the complexity that maybe means we don't see things the way we need to because we're standing at a 30,000 foot view and we have a lot of granularity there. So those are my perspectives. Those are the top 5 that I think we'll be seeing in 2021. Some of them may be, pretty easily understood. Some of them hopefully provide some insight into how to work across teams in the enterprise, get some of that security brought left and start thinking about that a little earlier as we're facing this sort of unprecedented level of not only privacy concerns, but remote work like we've never seen before, both of which lead themselves to scrutiny of the cloud in a way that I think is going to drive a lot better control over all of our personal and private data, but also a way to manage that and maintain that and deploy it at scale in ways that we probably didn't imagine we were going to get to this soon. For more information, you can see down there at the bottom, check out more details about these 5 predictions on our blog at styra.com. Check out Open Policy Agent if you're not familiar with it. It's a great project and we'd love to have you in the community. And of course, if you are deploying Open Policy Agent at scale, we've got a solution to help you do that and take away some of the heavy lifting for that with Styra DAS. I've been Chris Weber with Styra. Thank you so much for listening, and hopefully this gives us a good food for thought. Feel free to find me out there on social media. We can take up the conversation there as well. I appreciate it.
Hey everybody, happy Monday. This is Charlene O'Hanlon, and I'm here now with the Monday headlines for you. First up on Devops.com is an article that looks at BizDevSecOps. It's another extension of DevOps, moving beyond secure application development and performance to also understand the end value of the work. In other words, BizDevSecOps boils down to having full stack observability to connect application performance, security threats, and revenue generation. Only by democratizing access to important metrics and identifying runtime weaknesses can business outcomes truly drive production. Much has been happening over the last year or so as organizations have rushed to transform their businesses and infrastructure to be digital-centric, and IT staff is under mounting pressure to perform. BizDevSecOps advocates letting tangible business outcomes, such as conversion rates and performance, drive development. The concept is very similar to value stream management, which is a management technique or practice that focuses on increasing the flow of business value from customer request to customer delivery. And we've been talking a lot about value stream management on Devops.com lately. Regardless of what it's called, however, it's clear that more organizations are adding a new business focus to their application development efforts. And we have the latest installment from Don McVitie on DevOps and languages. This one is all about recommendations, advice on which language to use for a given project. The simple answer is that developers should use the right tool for the job. That said, it's not always easy to figure out which is the best tool. This article outlines some of the considerations developers should consider in making their choice, as well as some advice for newbies on which language or languages to learn to do your job more effectively and to keep you relevant in the marketplace. As always, Don has some interesting perspective, being in the trenches himself, so it's definitely worth the time to read. We also have the results of a survey that shows DevOps engineers are getting frustrated. On average, developers and DevOps team members report spending 15 hours a week managing tasks such as debugging pipelines and waiting for tests and builds to complete. That's about 39% of a 40-hour work week that's typically devoted to these tasks. When the number of developers and DevOps specialists that are employed today are factored into that equation along with their salaries, as much as $61 billion is being wasted on these tasks in the U.S. alone. This survey surfaces a very real opportunity to automate repetitive DevOps tasks before teams reach a breaking point. That could come sooner rather than later, though, as more organizations make the transition to cloud-native applications based on microservices. It's an interesting article. All right, over on Container Journal, we take a look at the growing issue of container security and how security as code could help level the playing field. As more organizations adopt a microservices deployment model, they're also adopting infrastructure as code to streamline continuous delivery. Some believe security policies should be described and embedded within the CI/CD process as well. Hence, security as code. Frameworks based on the open source Envoy are being eyed as a way to enable this idea. With Envoy growing in ubiquity across various service meshes and frameworks, some consider it a reasonable component to extend with security as code functionality. This would help locate threats and introduce role-based policies to protect Envoy-based frameworks. This article takes a look at the idea of security as code and what it would take to bring continuous security to the container ecosystem. And in news, Docker Inc. has made generally available an edition of the Docker Desktop for Mac application development tool on Mac OS systems based on an M1 system on a chip that was developed in part using an architecture defined by ARM. Docker Desktop for Mac can now be employed on the latest generation of Mac OS platforms to build container images that can run anywhere, including the Graviton 2 cloud service based on ARM processors that's now being offered by Amazon Web Services. Docker Inc. claims the beta edition of Docker Desktop for Mac has already been installed 45,000 times. That shows the number of developers employing Macs to build containerized applications is definitely growing. Apple claims the 5-nanometer M1 architecture is more efficient than x86 platforms because the processor I/O, security, and memory functions are now integrated within a system on a chip. In fact, the M1 is twice as fast as an x86-based platform and consumes just a quarter of the power. And as developers are increasingly being asked to do more, speed and power are becoming greater considerations in their choice of development environment, including the systems on which they create. All right, over on Security Boulevard, we have an article that looks at the Information Transparency and Personal Data Control Act that was recently introduced in Congress. The goal of the bill is to protect consumer privacy and put control of the consumer data into their own hands. Many states are surging ahead and creating their own privacy laws, each with their own flavor and serving the needs of a particular constituency or demographic. Having a federal policy will help stem consumer confusion and put the United States back into the conversation on global privacy policies, said Representative Susan Delbene, who introduced the bill. A national bill makes sense, but there are a lot of moving parts to technology and privacy and data control that perhaps one piece of legislation can address. This article takes a look at what the Information Transparency and Personal Data Control Act includes and what it doesn't, and what it could mean for a federal approach to data privacy. And finally, we have a look at the results of a recently released study on data encryption trends, which shows that, among other things, enterprise data encryption use is at an all-time high. This is despite growing complexity as IT environments expand beyond on-premises into the cloud. In fact, 65% of organizations polled said that discovering where their sensitive data actually resides is their top enterprise data encryption challenge. That said, 50% said they have an enterprise encryption strategy, and it is being applied consistently. That compares with only 15% who said they had one in 2006. It's clear more organizations see the value of data encryption, but even so, managing the process and even the sheer number of tools that are available for encryption are adding to their anxiety levels. According to the report, organizations use an average of 8 different encryption products, and having unified key management across cloud services and enterprise environments was ranked very important by 45% of respondents. Also, the survey found payment data and financial records are the data most commonly encrypted. Surprisingly, however, healthcare data was among the least likely data to be encrypted. Yikes. All right, that's it for the headlines. Please check back with me tomorrow when I will have a fresh new batch for you. Until then, have a great day, everybody. Please stay safe.
This is Digital Anarchist.
Hey everybody, welcome back to TechStrong TV. I am Charlene O'Hanlon, and I am here now with Mark Van de Waal, who is the CTO of HVR. Mark, thank you so much for joining me today. Really appreciate it.
Thank you. Pleasure is all mine.
Tell me a little bit about HVR.
Well, you've likely not heard of us, but I'm sure you've heard of many of our customers as we work with some of the biggest organizations in the world across industries. Organizations choose HVR, our technology, for its ability to replicate data efficiently from some of their most mission-critical operational database systems into a multitude of destination technologies. And this replicated data is often the basis for analytical use cases. And then as part of our commitment to replicate data accurately, our technology includes data validation capabilities that customers can use at any moment in time to validate whether their data is in sync across these heterogeneous environments.
All right, great. Well, obviously, we're all very, very aware of the importance of data in business today. They say that data is the new currency, right? So, it's got to be top of mind from security to manage effective management to the topic that we're going to talk about, which is data hygiene. So, I'm curious. And interested in finding out from you where your company kind of deals in the data hygiene space and what you guys are seeing right now.
Yeah, great question. Obviously, with the digital transformation, organizations are becoming more data-driven, and there's multiple aspects of data hygiene in that context. We replicate data. We have a commitment to replicating the data accurately, and that is a starting point from a data hygiene perspective. If the data is not copied correctly, then how can you build business decisions based on your data? There's the anecdotes out there, organizations using spreadsheets and forget even the mistakes that are made in formulas in spreadsheets, but having meetings to argue about who is looking at the right source of the truth, that's not very valuable. So what we see is organizations replicate data, consolidate data out of multiple systems, look at the data accuracy to at least ensure the data is valid, and that is only then the starting point. The proverb "garbage in, garbage out" applies to data as much as it applies anywhere else. Data may need to be cleansed, may need to be scrubbed. Metadata, MDM technologies may need to come in order to standardize data sets. But absolutely, where it starts is this replicated data set that is accurate, that is a correct representation of what's available in the operational source.
Yeah, it sounds like data hygiene is not an easy task for organizations to do, especially those organizations that deal with data on a very, very large scale. So what would you recommend that organizations do? What are some of the best practices that they can kind of keep in mind to kind of stay on track when it comes to data hygiene and just make sure that the data that they're using is actually, accurate and the latest version?
Yeah, so I think it starts by offloading some of the heavy lifting. Organizations, their mission critical systems, quite literally a slowdown in their systems can result in some real business impact from a monetary perspective. So take the data out, replicate it somewhere else efficiently, but try to keep it as real time as possible. You want your employees to build their decisions upon accurate, timely data. It starts by having that data out there soon after it hit the source systems. From an accuracy perspective, data validation on too large of a data set, it's unrealistic to be able to validate the correctness of the data across billions, tens of billions of records. It's not possible, but use increments. There are ways to identify what was recently changed. There's often patterns in data, and use your knowledge about these patterns to identify how can I get a comfort level about the accuracy of the data. Of course, the ultimate goal is to avoid your employees to start extracting data into a spreadsheet and carry the spreadsheet across the organization to justify their projects.
Gotcha. Okay. So have you noticed that as infrastructure environments have become more hybrid in nature, a lot more organizations are using cloud applications and cloud infrastructure, and data seems to be living on many different platforms. Have you noticed that the issue of data hygiene has increased because of this, or is heterogeneous environments, or is it something that is kind of ongoing regardless of the platforms that organizations are using?
From our perspective, I think it's an ongoing challenge, regardless of the platforms organizations are using. What we do see is that as organizations shift technologies, whether it's between on-premises and cloud environments or across different cloud environments, there is an ongoing danger of building more data silos. And with silos becomes a challenge of outdated data in one silo versus another. That is absolutely an ongoing challenge. We have certainly helped our customers migrate or move workloads across on-premises systems into clouds, between clouds, etc. So from that perspective, we've seen a lot of this happen. But yeah, like from an organizational perspective, it's just really difficult to shift completely from one data source or source of data, I should say, to another source of data.
Yeah. Okay. All right. And I imagine, data hygiene has a huge impact on whether an organization meets compliancy regulations and other, there are many different impacts to the organization if the data isn't, properly, replicated, integrated, scrubbed, if you will, and kind of kept up to standards. So, have you seen, I mean, especially in the last year or so when we've been working, pretty much everybody working remotely and have kind of had to shift to maybe new platforms or new ways of working. Have you seen that kind of impacting data hygiene as in general? And, are we going to see any kind of longer term repercussions because of this in relation as it relates to, say, compliance efforts?
So there's a couple of thoughts that come to mind since you mentioned compliance. We have customers who replicate financial data. That is subject to compliance, and organizations have a real strong focus, obviously from a compliance perspective, on that data accuracy. If you close your books based on replicated data, well, it better be the right representation of your books, otherwise you end up in legal trouble.
Right.
Then the other aspect from a data hygiene perspective and is simply the primary business process. I do not think that necessarily the shift to more remote working has resulted in more focus of this or has changed the importance of the data hygiene, but it's more the digital transformation altogether. And there's this example of one of our customers in the consumer packaging goods. They use replicated data to determine how to distribute product to point of sale, from a distribution center to point of sale. If that data were inaccurate, well, you can only imagine what's going to happen, like maybe product stays on the shelves in the distribution center, or there's not enough product to distribute, or points of sale receive not enough or too much of a particular product. And so there's lots of data hygiene perspectives that come into that. First of all, it replicates the data, but second of all, what if, let's say, point of sale information was entered incorrectly and you get duplicate values essentially for your point of sale? Right. That results into a logistical challenge, and that is your part of the primary business process as a consumer packaging good manufacturer. Mm-hmm. It becomes a major challenge. So data hygiene is there, irrespective, I think, of the shift toward remote working.
Okay. All right. Great. Well, like I said at the top of our interview, data is the new currency. So I think organizations really need to take a very, very strong focus on keeping that data as pristine as possible. Mark, thank you so much for taking the time and kind of just talking to me a little bit about data hygiene and its importance in organizations. And in this new digital economy, it is more important than ever. So I do appreciate your time. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
All right, everybody, please stick around. We've got lots more TechStrong TV coming up, so stay tuned.
Disruption is occurring across every aspect of IT. Open source, cloud services, DevOps, and cloud-native software architectures are democratizing IT and radically transforming how business is done. The old ways of creating software and doing IT are being replaced with agile, flexible, faster, and cheaper methods, benefiting vendors and users alike. Accelerated Strategies Group is out to democratize access of industry expertise and knowledge. We use our expertise and experience to offer insightful, intelligent, useful information in a variety of formats relevant to the IT community, digital events, videos, reports, assessments, workshops, and implementation projects with tech vendors, IT organizations, and business leaders. We widely and openly share our work products, often for free. Analyst reports these days aren't worth more than a graph or chart that tells a story or illustrates a market trend. We work with developers, DevOps teams, cloud architects, security engineers, and transformation leaders most every day, creating and implementing transformational strategies and technologies. We're not just thinkers, we're also doers.
This is Digital Anarchist.
Hey, everybody. Welcome back to TechStrong TV. I'm Charlene O'Hanlon, and I'm here now with Chris Wade, who is the CTO of a company called Itential. Chris, thanks so much for joining me today. Really appreciate it.
Thanks for having me.
Great. So tell me a little bit about Itential. Not familiar with your company.
So Itential is a network automation company. So we focus on automation, but we apply it to the network and the cloud.
Okay. All right. Great. So I imagine you guys have been doing some pretty big business since the beginning of the pandemic, with so many organizations that had to shift their workforces to fully remote, and all of a sudden realize that, hey, you know what, the network is a really important part of our business. So tell me a little bit about what you guys have seen in the marketplace regarding kind of networking in general over the past year or so, and maybe some of the trends that you're kind of seeing now as maybe some organizations are considering transitioning back or have this hybrid workforce. I mean, has network automation kind of become a larger part of the conversation with companies?
For sure. So I think, for a long time, people thought networking was hosted in the data center, and then we moved it to the cloud. And with the workforce being highly distributed, now our network's kind of all over the internet. So we like to say our network exploded on the internet. And whereas we used to think about connecting our desktops to the applications, now the network is a highly distributed machine, and we have to think about how do we, have security and latency and all the typical networking stuff in a highly distributed kind of network of networks environment.
So ergo, then the importance of network automation and helping kind of manage all those connections and understand what's happening on the network at all times, right?
For sure. And, what is a network anymore has changed quite dramatically. I mean, when we started Itential, most networks were made of boxes and wires. And now with the cloud, we're moving towards a software-centric world. So as networks have changed, people have had to rethink how they manage networks, what skill sets they need to manage networks, what are the business outcomes, and ultimately, how does the network support the business and digital transformation.
Right. I can remember back probably way too long ago, but we'd be in the office and the network would go down and somebody would like go over to the server closet or into the data center and, move some cables around and get us connected again. But now you can't really do that. So when you say the network down, it's like pretty much the entire Southeast America is down or something like that. So it's networking on a much grander scale than traditionally we have seen. But do you think that also has kind of changed kind of the way organizations, I know it's changed the way organizations think about networking, but do you think that it's kind of, I don't know, maybe made, do you think it's made networking kind of a more visible or less visible for organizations these days and on their priority list, if you will?
I think networking is considered ubiquitous. As you say, if the network goes down, how can we function? So it's really, I think most organizations felt comfortable kind of separating the network from their kind of cloud infrastructure teams, and a lot of people thought we were going to just move into the cloud and the network would kind of go away. But as the networks evolved, we're seeing that the network fabric to tie all the clouds together, to tie your applications together, are becoming critically important. So from our perspective, it's the networking teams going from kind of a separate team to now being reintegrated into the rest of IT strategy and being a core component that application teams have to think about. And for so many organizations, the network is also becoming kind of software defined. So they have to have a much different set of skills than traditional IT folk have had that have, received their networking certification from, way back. So have you seen kind of that profile actually changing in relation to those who are actually working on the network these days? I mean, is it a different type of person who, who maybe is also in charge of certain other things within the organization that really kind of don't fit that regular IT person profile? For sure. So we've had networking folks think about retooling, retraining, and there's been a kind of an overall mindset shift where people think networking teams need to become quote unquote developers. And as we try to apply DevOps processes to the networking, what we found is that it's multiple disciplines. So ultimately for companies to be successful with the transition, we have to think about how do we get the most people to participate in the network and how do we get the most people to participate in automation? Because having a deep network understanding and being a developer, most organizations can kind of count them on a single hand. So the question is, if networking is becoming more important across the board, how do we diversify the skill sets? And then also from a tooling perspective, how do we enable more people to participate?
Yeah, absolutely. I was actually kind of going down that DevOps road. So thanks for taking it down there for me. It's a great. It's been very, very interesting to see the evolution of the network from the hardware based with cabling to cloud and kind of distributed networks, and then kind of even going down further into kind of the developer mindset. So where do you see the network, kind of the whole network fabric moving forward beyond, where we are today? So,
ultimately the target on the wall is infrastructure as code. In most modern DevOps communities, we talk about that as if it exists today. In the networking, we're still kind of in the early phases of that. So whereas we can centralize configuration for applications, the network configuration is highly distributed. So really what the industry and what most companies are looking for is how do we apply those infrastructure as code kind of concepts towards the network, understanding that it's quite different.
All right. Networking is one of those areas that it's, it seems really boring when you start out, but you kind of get layer down or a layer or two down, and it really actually becomes a really fascinating technology. Chris, thank you so much for kind of walking me through what you guys are seeing with the network infrastructure these days and where you see it heading in the future. It's always a pleasure to talk to you. Thanks again.
Absolutely.
All right, everybody, please stick around. We've got lots more TechStrong TV coming up, so stay tuned. Hey everybody, happy Monday. This is Charlene O'Hanlon, and I'm here now with the webinars preview. As always, I tell you about lots of webinars that are coming up on Devops.com, Container Journal, and Security Boulevard. Here are 3 that are coming up very soon in the hopes that you can mark your calendar and join us. The first one is called The Human Side of DevOps, Upscaling for the Digital Transformation. This one is happening Tuesday, April 20th at 11 a.m. Eastern on Devops.com. It is sponsored by Tricentis. This is the latest in our DevOps Unbound series. In this one, we look at people. People, or humans, are critical to DevOps success. And just as we invest in tools and build processes, software leaders recognize it is vital to invest in DevOps skills for their people and software teams. Our panel of experts who are leading software teams and helping people grow and thrive discuss the essential ingredients necessary to upskill in today's and tomorrow's digital transformation. The second webinar I want to let you know about is also happening Tuesday, April 20th. This one is at 1 p.m. Eastern, and it is called Data Science-Driven Digital Application Testing on Real Local Devices for Flawless Digital Experiences. That is a very long title. This one is also on Devops.com, and it is sponsored by Red Hat Marketplace, where this one takes a look at application testing, mobile application testing, and how the Headspin AI platform can help organizations create applications that meet expectations of their global user base, because we all know that poor application performance can degrade customer experience and leading to higher bounce rates, lower customer satisfaction, and brand dilution. So the Headspin AI platform can help organizations get the in-depth data needed to determine the root causes of issues, test applications on local real devices and not on simulators or emulators, and help organizations quickly identify and recommend actions without the need for SDK code changes or instrumentation. Interesting stuff there. It's going to be a great one. The last webinar I want to let you know about is also happening Tuesday, April 20th. This one is at 3 p.m. Eastern on Devops.com, and it is called How to Choose a Time Series Database and Get Started Fast. This one is sponsored by Influx Data, and it is all about that base, the database that is. We'll look at questions such as, why do you need a specialized database for time? The case to their management for getting yet another database, how to evaluate the various time series databases on the market and their various editions, and how to get started quickly with collecting, visualizing, processing, and alerting on time series data. Good stuff there. All right, that's all that I have for you today for the webinar's preview. Please check back with me tomorrow when I will have a fresh batch for you. Until then, have a great day. Please stay safe. All right, welcome back. Next up, we have Mitch Ashley speaking with Todd Wescalis, who is the AVP of AT&T Cybersecurity. They talk about zero trust and digital transformation and what organizations are both relying on and expecting in their cybersecurity in this digital age. It's a great conversation and one definitely worth checking out. So let's get right to it.
This is Digital Anarchist.
Well, the pleasure being joined by Todd Wescalis, who is AVP of AT&T Cybersecurity. Todd, great to be talking with you.
Thank you for the invite, Mitch. Appreciate it.
Would you first introduce yourself? Tell us a little bit about what you do at AT&T Cybersecurity. Great to hear about that. And we'll kind of dive into what's happening these days.
Sounds great. So again, my name is Todd Wescalis. I run AT&T Cybersecurity Consulting and Professional Services Group. And so that incorporates not only traditional cybersecurity consulting, but also professional services, helping our clients transition to AT&T managed services. And we have a training and certification arm as well. And so I lead a team of very talented individuals that help our external clients solve their complex cybersecurity challenges.
Excellent. Are there a certain size or industry type companies that you tend to work more with?
No, AT&T is a big organization, so we have a reach across a lot of segments and a lot of verticals, and we support all of our clients equally.
I could see that makes a lot of sense. Well, I'm really curious to hear, given all the kinds of work and the kinds of customers that you do. First of all, and I've run technical organizations too and brought in outside resources. What is the most common reason someone will say, "Hey, let's talk to AT&T Cybersecurity and get their help on the following"?
Yeah, I think that there's two primary reasons. One is there's an emerging technology trend that they want to get their arms around. They're thinking about moving to like a SASE or a zero trust. Or they need some independent third party to come in and look at their organization, either from a regulatory compliance perspective, or they truly just want to get a third party in there to put a fresh set of eyes on how they're doing things.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that absolutely is valuable too, right? You think you're doing the right things, but especially it's valuable someone who's talking and working with multiple companies, and so you get a broad spectrum, no pun intended, of experience in what people are doing, what's happening in the industry. Well, I'm really curious. What have you seen over the last kind of 18 months or so with, of course, the COVID and impact on staff and remote work, but also it's been a huge acceleration of digital transformation projects, digital experiences with customer, changing how we deliver services, contactless delivery, all those kind of things. What has that sort of brought to the forefront that maybe you didn't expect to happen as quickly or didn't expect at all?
Yeah, so I think there's a few things there. One, I think a lot of organizations were walking into 2020 thinking about that zero trust model. We'd spent a lot of 2018, 2019 talking about it, not really sure how to get there, but knowing that it's going to be important, right? So then all of a sudden we're thrown into the COVID times. And, that sort of accelerated a little bit of adoption to, I've now got a greenfield or I've got to change my technology. I've got to go through a digital transformation. How do I deal with that? And a lot of that was driven around business resilience, right? I think a lot of organizations walked into this not as prepared as they could have been. We see organizations that have a strong background in cybersecurity or they're following some sort of maturity model fared much better with COVID than organizations that weren't really prepared from a cyber perspective, right? And then now what we're starting to see is the acceleration of those conversations from the late 2019 to 2020 about zero trust starting to evolve into the new frameworks of zero trust and SASE deployments.
Interesting. Yeah, I'm curious because one way to look at this is, with businesses want more agility, right? They need to pivot, but also just overall responding, reacting, moving much more quickly. In addition to the resilience that you talked about. Now, from a cybersecurity, maybe other perspectives, that dynamic, lots of change doesn't necessarily always mean it's a good thing. It makes it more challenging because now, our environment's already changing a lot. Have you seen that as a challenge for folks? And how does zero trust or other approaches help or maybe not necessarily add to addressing that issue?
Yeah, I think the most interesting thing is the shift as we go through these digital transformations to think about digital trust, right? And COVID kind of highlighted a lot of that along with the resiliency side of the house, right? Building that trust and that brand with your clients is critical, especially when you're suddenly thrown into this distributed environment where now you've got your workers everywhere, you've got your data moving to the cloud from applications, you've got storage moving to the cloud. So digital trust has been a big part of the thoughts of organizations as they go through this transformation.
Yeah, and that even extends to supply chain, and not talking about the supply chain attacks, but in economic challenging times, those things get disrupted very easily. And when you go back to rebuild them, oftentimes we redesign them. We rethink our supply chains, our partners, how we have things manufactured, where all those kind of approaches, which means we might be working with some of the same, but a lot of new partners, new organization. And of course, we're talking about digital trust across those boundaries.
Yeah, and I think as you expand your digital footprint, right, you're expanding the number of those partners that you're working with. And that's obviously opening up your threat landscape more and more. So we saw that was, some of the supply chain attacks that we're seeing, and a big increase now on looking at third-party risk management. How do I know the vendors that I'm working with are following the right procedures to ensure that my data that they're managing is secure?
Mm-hmm. Even the sort of end user ransomware, phishing, there's so many things happening on that front. you're looking inward at the business and outward from a partnership standpoint is only one part of it, right? That doesn't seem to be going away anytime soon. Matter of fact, it's accelerating like everything else.
Driving endpoint security. I think that's where we're going. And I think that's sort of the journey that we're talking about with zero trust. Like when we started talking about getting rid of the perimeter, moving the controls closer to the data and to the individuals, right? Endpoint's a big piece of that. So EDR and deploying those right technologies so you can put those controls on those end devices that are no longer within the perimeter of your environment, right? They're sitting in somebody's living room now, and perhaps their kids might have access to it as well, or you don't know who else is on that wireless network, right? So that's a big drive for that.
And I'm sure you've talked about some elements of it already. Kind of move from what is zero trust? What does it mean? What's sort of a collective definition of it? If you had to describe for someone, you're sort of the process you go through of implementing or designing it and implementing a zero trust strategy, how would you describe that to somebody who is thinking about how they're going to do it?
Yeah, I think the first step is to understand what you're trying to protect. And that should have been the tenets of cybersecurity the entire time, right? I mean, historically it was, I'm going to protect my organization, I'm going to put up firewalls and build a perimeter, but we didn't really think deep inside of the business as to where that data might reside, what data we're using, right? And so the idea of zero trust is eliminating that perimeter, moving the controls closer, putting the right controls around the data and the users, and allowing those users access. So really the first step is finding that data, discovering that data, and classifying that data within the organization. Understanding what is critical to that organization, what has the biggest impact from a financial loss perspective or regulatory impact. And once you've identified and classified that data, then you can start building micro perimeters around those data and putting the controls closer to that data and spending your money much more wisely than you would have probably in the past.
Instead of used to be a bunch of boxes that were all adding some layered defense, right? Or layers of the onion per se. I'm curious, what's the reaction of not just the folks in security or cybersecurity in an organization? What's the reaction from the rest of the organization, whether it's people in a network group, people in auditing, people in governance and compliance? Do they see zero trust as, oh, thank goodness we're doing this, is awesome? Or what is this? We don't understand it. Where people fall on that?
Yeah, I think that once you get through the first couple of steps of zero trust, not only does it make a lot of their jobs easier, right? Because now you've got your focus areas inside of the organization. I think it also helps business move faster, right? You can accelerate the deployment of new business models and technologies and those types of things because you've got now a framework that's going to provide security to that device, that data, whatever it might be, as you roll it out. So I think at first it's a difficult task. I think that a lot of organizations might feel overwhelmed, right? Like, I'm going to step into this big thing. Where do I start? But take small bites at the apple, right? Just start with some sensitive data here and there, and then start building around that model. And eventually you'll encompass everything you need to within the organization. And again, it makes everybody's job easier once you're implemented.
Yeah, it seems like, I'm curious your perspective on this. It seems like a similar transition we've gone through with software, from going from monolith to microservices and service mesh, where it's much more granular, so we can deliver software more quickly with more agility. In a way, that's kind of what zero trust is doing, is localizing it, moving it into smaller components. So if you do want to do things, you can do it on an element or section or an area where data exists, instead of on a macro basis of how does this affect everything. In a way, it's that same kind of move to a micro level scope within a larger framework.
Yeah, no, that's a great example. It's exactly what it is. I think the difference here is that we're leading with security, right? Where in those microservices and that application development cycle, we tend to get to security at the end. So again, another benefit of doing this is that you're moving security closer to the start of that project. You're shifting it left and being more successful.
Well, it does seem like on the whole shift left topic, those two things, security and software, given those similar approaches at a macro level, might help it be more compatible to do things in a shift left fashion. You're not fitting into this massive enterprise corporate framework that, 3/4 of it doesn't apply to your app, but you got to go through it anyway. To this will work for this application, the state of these users, this geography, whatever it is.
Well, essentially, when you start building off of the data set and then you start shifting to that application development cycle, you start having those conversations about what data are we processing in this application? What is it touching? What is the data flows through the organization? So subconsciously or not, you are shifting to that left mode.
Mm-hmm. Good. I'm curious. I know you do some work in the cybersecurity maturity model certification. It applies heavily, of course, to DoD. Not an area I'm an expert at for sure. Tell us a little bit about that. I know it applies, of course, to government defense work. Maybe how does it also apply for outside of in the civilian sector?
Yeah, it's an interesting program, and I think it's long overdue, right? And I think it also speaks to sort of where a lot of regulatory frameworks are going in cybersecurity. We're seeing this with the PCI shift now as well, right? From this point in time assessment, they've slowly evolved into managing, protecting cardholder data as a program to now it's a risk management based approach, right? And so with the CMMC model, it's very similar, looking at the DoD contractors, obviously with all the attacks and supply chains and things that are going on, they've got to ensure that the data that they're handling and the connections they have into the environment, and then their subcontractors as well are secure. But again, it's a risk-based approach, so you have to look at it commensurate with the type of data that they're handling and the business they do with the DoD, right? So you can build that maturity based on those things. So really shifting from sort of cybersecurity as binary, like am I secure or not, really incorporating that risk-based approach to it.
How might CMMC fit with, say, a SOC 2 compliance or other frameworks of the compliance frameworks? Is it some heavily overlap? Is it similar? Is it something new and different?
I think it's similar. I think the difference is that with the CMMC, it is a maturity model, right? And so you've got a progressive path to go from where you are at a level 1 to get to a level 3 or a level 4, right? And it allows you to step through that maturity model, again, based on the type of data that you're processing. Unlike another model that might just look at, hey, these are the controls, and you're either passing or failing based on the set of controls that you put in place.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I've gone through other sort of certifications. They weren't necessarily called a maturity model, but oftentimes a lot of the assessment is not what the processes should be, but do you have processes and do you follow them, and do you have ways of making sure that they are being applied and used? Is that similar to the CMMC?
It's very similar to that, right? And if you don't have them, how can you get them in place, in a timely fashion to achieve that certification level you need to continue to do business? But again, like I mentioned earlier with PCI, we're starting to see the shift to more of a risk-based approach where historically it was very prescriptive. If you look at the cardholder data world, right? And it was, again, controls are here, you either have them or you don't. And if you didn't, then you could write some compensating control for it, but it was heavily inspected. Now they're shifting, as with other models, looking at, what is the risk appetite for the organization? Is it an acceptable level of risk? And, is that control commensurate with that?
Mm-hmm. Cool. I'm also wondering, I don't know, do you get into the privacy side of this and some of the regulations and requirements, whether it's Europe or California or, things are kind of bifurcating now, and it makes for a very complex landscape, not just today, but I think the future we're headed towards of all the privacy requirements, regulations across, any geography, government entity, whatever it might be.
Well, we certainly can help an organization look at the type of data that they're receiving, processing, transmitting, storing, all of those types of things in relation to those privacy controls. But we're not a privacy auditor. That's just not a space that AT&T is interested in getting into right now.
It's a whole nother bailiwick, as they say.
It certainly is.
Now, do you work primarily in the public sector, more so in the government sector? Where's sort of your specialty?
It is interesting. We work a lot with federal government, obviously, as well as state and local. We see a large demand for support in that state and local space where they may not have the resources or the funds, the expertise to help them get where they need to go, or they may look at leveraging some sort of a collective buying agreement so they can get the power of a state to help out all the agencies that are within that state. So we certainly do a lot of work in the state, local education space. But again, mid-enterprise is another area where, large enterprises tend to have those teams that they can support them, especially in the financials. They can get what they need to get. But those mid-enterprises are really the ones that need some support. The teams are often taxed. They're working full-time on the projects that they have and going through some sort of digital transformation, implementing new technologies, looking at regulatory frameworks. They really lean to help us. They lean into us to help them, with us with that type of work.
It's interesting, both kind of from my own experience, but even more so data that we get as an analyst firm. That mid-market oftentimes is well understaffed, missing the breadth of security or other skills requirements, because the requirements are much larger, but they haven't reached that sort of critical mass that a large enterprise might have to build out and have enough people to meet the expertise that you require, even the tools. So it's oftentimes, I think it's a rich market for a lot of services, cybersecurity included.
Yeah, we see a couple of things in that space. One, a lot of those mid-enterprise organizations are third-party providers. They're providing some sort of service to another entity, right? So they're getting a lot of pressure now as we look at the third-party pressure that everybody's seeing, right? So they're seeing that and they're looking for help. We also see a big demand for sort of this area of co-management, right? So those large enterprises or even the large federal space have plenty of folks to staff their SOC for the most part, right? They've got the resources, but that mid-enterprise might be able to do a tier 2 analyst, but they don't have the staff to do tier 1, right? And then they really maybe need some help at a tier 3 level. And so this co-management model is something that we're seeing a lot of in those organizations.
Mm-hmm. Well, this has been a lot of fun talking with you. I think we could grab a beer somewhere someday and have a much longer conversation, I'm sure. Where can folks find out more about AT&T Cybersecurity Services?
Yeah, if you go to att.com/cybersecurity, you see our full portfolio there. We're always happy to help out.
And I assume global services, primarily U.S., North America. What's your focus?
Global.
Global?
Yep.
Okay, excellent. Well, please check them out. It's been really good talking with you, Todd, AVP of AT&T Cybersecurity. Thanks for being with us today.
Thank you, Mitch.
That wraps up another TechStrong TV broadcast. I hope you enjoyed it as much as I did. We are going to be back tomorrow with a brand new episode, so I hope you can join me then. Until then, I hope everybody has a great day, and whatever you do, please stay safe.